Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I hope you're doing well tonight. Get comfortable, settle in, and let's spend some time together thinking about something that might surprise you. Tonight, we're going to talk about philosophy, but not the kind you'd find in a university lecture hall. Not the kind written in old books by people with names you can't pronounce. We're going to talk about the philosophy of a man who once traded his soul for a donut. A man who has been electrocuted, shot into space, fallen down cliffs, lost his job dozens of times, nearly destroyed his marriage more than once, and somehow through all of it remained one of the happiest characters ever put on screen. Tonight we're going to talk about Homer J. Simpson. Now I know what you might be thinking. Homer Simpson and philosophy don't belong in the same sentence. He's a cartoon. He's a buffoon. He's the guy who strangles his son, drinks too much Duff beer, and sleeps through his job at a nuclear power plant. He can barely spell philosophy, let alone practice it. And you'd be right about all of those things. Homer is not a philosopher. He's never read a book of philosophy in his life. He probably couldn't tell you the difference between Plato and Play-Doh. But here's the thing that makes Homer so fascinating and the thing we're going to explore tonight as you drift off to sleep. Homer Simpson, without ever trying, without ever knowing, has become one of the most philosophically provocative characters in the history of television. Not because he's smart enough to articulate a philosophy, but because his entire existence raises a question that has haunted the greatest thinkers in human history. That question is this: is it better to be a wise person in pain or a fool at peace? It sounds simple. It sounds like a joke even. But this question goes all the way back to ancient Greece. It runs through the writings of Aristotle, through the ethics of John Stuart Mill, through the existentialism of Albert Camus and Jean-Paul Sartre. It's one of the foundational questions of Western thought. And a cartoon man from Springfield, through no intention of his own, has become one of the most vivid illustrations of this dilemma ever put on screen. Homer doesn't answer the question. The show, across more than 35 years and over 770 episodes, doesn't answer it either. But the show keeps asking it, over and over, in different ways, from different angles. And tonight, we're going to explore those different angles. We're going to look at Homer through the lens of Aristotle, through the lens of Mill, through the lens of Camus and Epicurus, and even a little bit of Eastern philosophy. We're going to look at specific episodes and specific moments that, beneath the jokes and the slapstick and the doze, contain genuinely profound ideas about what it means to live a good life. This isn't going to be a rushed thing. We've got plenty of time, so just settle in, let the ideas wash over you, and if you fall asleep along the way, that's perfectly fine. That's actually the point. These are thoughts worth carrying into sleep, thoughts about happiness and wisdom and what it really means to be alive in a universe that doesn't come with an instruction manual. Before we go any further, if this kind of content helps you relax and drift off, a subscribe really helps us make more of these. It's free and it supports the channel, but no pressure. You're here and that's enough. Now, let's start at the beginning. Not the beginning of The Simpsons, though we'll get there. Let's start with the beginning of philosophy itself. Because to understand why Homer matters, we need to understand a man who lived in ancient Greece about 2,400 years ago, a man named Aristotle. And the reason Aristotle matters to this conversation is that he was one of the first people in human history to sit down and seriously try to answer the question of what makes a good life. Aristotle was a student of Plato, who was a student of Socrates. He lived in Athens in the 4th century BCE, and he wrote about everything: politics, science, logic, biology, poetry. But the work that matters for us tonight is called the Nicomachean Ethics. It's a book about ethics, obviously, but more specifically, it's a book about happiness. Aristotle believed that the purpose of human life, the ultimate goal that everything else is aimed at, was something he called eudaimonia. This is a Greek word that gets translated as happiness, but that translation is a little misleading. Eudaimonia means something closer to flourishing or living well. It's not just feeling good in the moment. It's about your whole life being good, being rich and full and complete in the ways that matter. Now, Aristotle had very specific ideas about how you achieve eudaimonia. He believed it came from practicing virtues. And virtues, for Aristotle, were habits of character that represented what he called the golden mean. The golden mean is the balance point between two extremes, Courage, for example, is the virtue that sits between cowardice on one side and recklessness on the other. Generosity is the virtue between stinginess and wastefulness. Honesty is the virtue between deception and brutal, hurtful frankness. For Aristotle, living well meant finding these balance points and practicing them consistently throughout your life until they became second nature, until they became who you are. So where does Homer Simpson fit into all of this? On the surface, he doesn't fit at all. Homer is not courageous in any consistent way. He's not generous, except by accident. He's not moderate in anything, certainly not in eating or drinking. He's lazy, selfish, impulsive, and frequently destructive. If Aristotle were to look at Homer's character and measure it against his list of virtues, Homer would fail almost every test. He's not the golden mean of anything. He's the extreme on nearly every scale. But here's where it gets interesting. In 2001, a book was published called The Simpsons and Philosophy, The Doe of Homer. It was edited by a philosophy professor named William Irwin and published by Open Court as part of their Popular Culture and Philosophy series. The book features 18 essays by professional philosophers and academics, and it became a massive success, selling over 203,000 copies. It's the best-selling book in that entire philosophy series, and it's been used as a textbook in university philosophy courses. There's actually a course at UC Berkeley called Simpsons and Philosophy that's devoted entirely to exploring these ideas. One of the essays in that book is called Homer and Aristotle by a philosopher named Raja Halwani. And what Halwani does in that essay is something clever and unexpected. He takes Aristotle's framework and applies it to Homer, fully expecting to demonstrate that Homer is a moral failure by Aristotelian standards. And he does demonstrate that. Homer doesn't embody Aristotle's virtues in any traditional sense. But then Halwani notices something else. Something Aristotle himself valued enormously, but that often gets overlooked in discussions of his ethics. Homer possesses a genuine love of life, and this is where it gets interesting for our purposes tonight. Because Aristotle didn't just care about virtues in the abstract. He cared about the actual experience of living. He believed that a truly flourishing person, a person who had achieved eudaimonia, would experience pleasure in the right things. They would enjoy doing good. They would take pleasure in virtuous activities. They would love life and find it rich and satisfying. Homer loves life, not in a sophisticated, examined, philosophical way. He loves it in the most basic, immediate, sensory way possible. He loves eating. He loves his beer. He loves his family even when he forgets their names. He loves sitting on the couch watching television. He loves donuts with a passion that borders on the spiritual. These are simple pleasures, the kind that a philosopher might dismiss as base or unrefined. But Homer experiences them with a fullness and immediacy that is actually quite rare. When Homer eats a donut, the donut is everything. He's not eating while worrying about his cholesterol or his mortality or the state of the economy. He's not multitasking. He's not scrolling through his phone. He's just eating a donut, and in that moment, the donut is the entire universe. His famous donuts isn't just a catchphrase. It's an expression of total, undivided presence in the experience of pleasure. Now, you might say that's not what Aristotle meant by flourishing, and you'd be partly right. Aristotle would want Homer to enjoy higher pleasures, intellectual pleasures, moral pleasures, the pleasure of doing good for its own sake. But there's a thread in Aristotle's thinking that suggests the capacity for enjoyment itself, the ability to be fully present in your pleasures and to take genuine satisfaction from life, is not nothing. It's actually something important. A person who can't enjoy anything, who moves through life without pleasure or satisfaction, is not flourishing, no matter how virtuous they might be in the abstract. Homer's capacity for joy, his ability to find genuine, unforced happiness in the simplest things, is a form of engagement with life that Aristotle would have recognized as valuable, even if Homer falls short in virtually every other area. Professor Daniel Bonevac of the University of Texas has used The Simpsons to teach Aristotelian ethics in his philosophy courses for years. He's noted that Homer raises genuine Aristotelian dilemmas that can't be easily dismissed. One of his favorite examples comes from an episode where Homer gets illegal cable television. Lisa, his 8-year-old daughter, is horrified by her father's crime and refuses to watch the stolen programming. Homer complains to Marge about Lisa, saying, "There's something wrong with that kid. She's so moral. Why can't she be more like, well, not like Bart, but there's got to be a happy medium." And Bonevac points out that Homer, without knowing it, has stumbled into one of Aristotle's central ideas, the golden mean. Virtue is the middle point between extremes. Lisa might be too far toward one extreme of morality. Bart is obviously too far toward the other. Homer is asking for the mean. He's asking for balance. And that's a genuinely Aristotelian question, raised by a man who has never heard of Aristotle and probably thinks Nicomachean is a type of ice cream. This is what makes Homer so endlessly interesting from a philosophical perspective. He doesn't know what he's doing. He doesn't know what he's saying. But the situations the show puts him in and the instinctive responses he has to those situations keep bumping into questions that philosophers have been wrestling with for millennia. Aristotle also believed that happiness required a certain amount of external goods. You needed friends, family, health, some degree of material comfort. You couldn't flourish if you were starving or completely alone or in constant pain. Homer has all of these things. He has a wife who loves him despite his many, many flaws. He has 3 children. He has friends at Moe's Tavern. He has a house, a car, a job. He's not rich, but he's not destitute. He has the basic material conditions that Aristotle said were necessary for human flourishing. And unlike many characters in fiction who have these things and still feel empty, Homer genuinely enjoys them. He is grateful for his life in a way that he could never articulate, but that shows up in his behavior constantly. He comes home to Marge. He sits on the couch with his kids. He goes to Moe's with his friends. And he finds these ordinary activities genuinely satisfying. There's a moment in the show, in an episode called And Maggie Makes 3 from season 6, that captures this perfectly. The episode is about why there are no photos of Maggie, Homer's youngest daughter, anywhere in the house. Through a series of flashbacks, we learn that Homer had finally achieved his dream of working at a bowling alley. He was happy, truly, genuinely happy. But then Marge became pregnant with Maggie, and Homer had to go back to the nuclear power plant because he needed the money. Mr. Burns, his boss, put up a demotivational plaque in Homer's workspace that reads, "Don't forget, you're here forever." It's a cruel reminder that Homer is trapped. But when we see Homer's workstation at the end of the episode, he's covered parts of the plaque with photos of Maggie so that it now reads, "Do it for her." This moment is one of the most emotionally powerful in the show's entire run, and it's philosophically significant in a way that goes deeper than it might first appear. Homer has taken a symbol of meaninglessness, a plaque designed to remind him that his life is a trap, and he has transformed it into a symbol of purpose and love. He has created meaning where there was none. He has found a reason to endure the unendurable. And he's done it not through philosophical reasoning or spiritual enlightenment, but through the simple, instinctive act of loving his daughter. This is exactly what existentialist philosophers have been telling us we need to do for over a century. Create meaning in a meaningless world. Homer does it without trying. He does it without knowing. And that might be the most philosophically interesting thing about him. Aristotle would have found Homer a fascinating case study. A man who fails at nearly every virtue, but who possesses an enormous capacity for joy and love. A man who doesn't flourish by any conventional measure, but who seems genuinely content in a way that many virtuous people are not. Homer's existence challenges Aristotle's framework by suggesting that the relationship between virtue and happiness might be more complicated than Aristotle supposed. You can be deeply flawed and still deeply happy. You can lack every intellectual virtue and still possess something that Aristotle would have to acknowledge as valuable. Let's stay with this idea for a while, because it leads us somewhere important. Aristotle would have found Homer interesting, but there's another philosopher, one who lived about 2,000 years after Aristotle, who might have found Homer even more fascinating. His name was John Stuart Mill, and he wrote one of the most influential books in the history of ethics. And in that book, he said something that Homer Simpson, in one of the show's greatest episodes, would directly challenge. Mill was a 19th century English philosopher, and his most famous work is called utilitarianism. The basic idea of utilitarianism is that the right action is the one that produces the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. It sounds simple, but Mill spent a lot of time working out the complications. And one of the biggest complications was the question of what counts as happiness. Because not all pleasures are the same, Mill made a distinction between what he called higher pleasures and lower pleasures. Lower pleasures are bodily and sensory. Eating, drinking, physical comfort, simple entertainment. Higher pleasures are intellectual and moral. Reading great literature, appreciating art, engaging in philosophical thought, the satisfaction of doing good for others. Mill argued that higher pleasures are fundamentally superior to lower pleasures. Not just different, but better, more valuable, more conducive to genuine happiness. And then Mill made a famous claim that has been debated ever since. He said that it is better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied. Better to be a wise person who suffers than a fool who feels content. Because Socrates' dissatisfaction comes from understanding reality deeply, and that understanding, even when it's painful, is more valuable than the fool's contentment, which comes from ignorance. This is a powerful claim, and for most of the history of philosophy, most people have agreed with it. Of course, it's better to be wise and suffering than foolish and happy. Of course, knowledge is more valuable than ignorance. Of course, the examined life, as Socrates himself said, is the only life worth living. And then along comes an episode of The Simpsons that challenges this entire tradition. Quietly, gently, through comedy and cartoon, this episode asks whether Mill might have been wrong, whether the fool's happiness might actually be the wiser choice. The episode is called HOMR. It's season 12, episode 9. It originally aired on January 7th, 2001, and it won the Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program that year. It was written by Al Jean, one of the show's most important writers, and it takes its inspiration from a short story called Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. But while it borrows the basic premise from that story, it reaches a fundamentally different and more philosophically devastating conclusion. Here's what happens. The episode opens with the Simpsons visiting an animation festival where Homer discovers a motion capture technology called Animotion. He likes it so much that he invests the entire family's life savings in the company's stock. The stock immediately tanks. The company goes bankrupt. Homer has lost everything. To make money, Homer takes a job as a human guinea pig at a medical testing center. During the experiments, the doctors are baffled by how spectacularly unintelligent Homer is. They run every test they can think of. And during a brain scan, they find something extraordinary. There's a crayon lodged in Homer's brain. A crayon lodged in his brain. It's been there since he was 6 years old, when he shoved an entire 16-pack of crayons up his nose and sneezed out only 15 of them. The doctors tell Homer that this crayon has been pressing on his frontal lobe for his entire life, and it's the reason for his lifelong intellectual limitations. They offer to remove it. Homer agrees and the surgery is performed. And overnight, everything changes. Homer's IQ jumps from 55 to 105. That's still just average by normal standards, but for Homer, it's a revelation. He can suddenly think clearly. He can articulate complex ideas. He can understand things that were always just noise to him before. The world opens up in ways he never imagined possible. And the first thing that happens, the very first consequence of Homer's new intelligence, is that he forms a genuine bond with his daughter Lisa. For the entire run of the show up to this point, Homer and Lisa have loved each other but existed on different planes. Lisa is a genius, an intellectual, a saxophone-playing Buddhist vegetarian who reads Sylvia Plath and listens to jazz. Homer can barely form a coherent sentence. They love each other, but they can't really communicate. Not about the things that matter most to Lisa. With the crayon removed, Homer can finally meet Lisa where she lives. They talk about ideas. They share interests. They connect intellectually for the first time in Lisa's life. And Lisa is overjoyed. She finally has the father she's always dreamed of. A father who can understand her. A father who can engage with her mind, not just her emotions. It's one of the most tender father-daughter moments in the show, and it's made possible by a crayon being pulled out of a cartoon man's brain. But then the other shoe drops. Because intelligence doesn't just bring connection, it brings awareness. And awareness, as Homer's about to discover, has a cost. Homer's new intelligence allows him to see things he couldn't see before. He looks around his workplace, the Springfield nuclear power plant, and for the first time, he recognizes how dangerous it is. He's been sleeping through his job for years, literally sleeping at the controls of a nuclear reactor, and it never occurred to him that this was a problem. Now it terrifies him. He writes a detailed safety report and submits it to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. The report is so thorough and so alarming that the plant is temporarily shut down. Homer has done something genuinely good. He's potentially saved lives. But the shutdown costs his coworkers their jobs, at least temporarily, and they're furious with him. Homer's friends at Moe's Tavern also start to pull away. He can't enjoy the simple pleasures he used to share with them. He tries to watch the football game with them, but now he notices the strategies and tactics instead of just enjoying the spectacle. He tries to drink with them, but his enhanced brain can't ignore the damage the alcohol is doing to his body. He tries to tell jokes, but his sense of humor has changed. Everything is different. Everything is worse. The warm, uncomplicated camaraderie he used to share with Barney and Lenny and Carl and Moe is gone, replaced by an awkward intellectual distance that nobody wants. Homer goes to Lisa with his problem. And Lisa, his brilliant 8-year-old daughter, shows him a graph she's made. On the x-axis is intelligence. On the y-axis is happiness, and the line goes down. As intelligence goes up, happiness goes down. Dad, Lisa tells him, as intelligence goes up, happiness often goes down. She says it gently because she knows this truth intimately. She's lived it her entire life. She's the smartest kid in Springfield, and she's also one of the loneliest, one of the most isolated, one of the saddest. Her intelligence hasn't brought her happiness. It's brought her awareness of all the things that are wrong with the world, and that awareness is a burden she carries every day. This is the moment where the episode transforms from a comedy into a genuine philosophical argument, because Homer has to make a choice. He can keep the intelligence. He can stay this new, smarter version of himself. He can continue to bond with Lisa, to see the world clearly, to understand things he never understood before. But he'll also continue to lose his friends, his simple pleasures, his contentment. He'll continue to see the world's problems and feel powerless against most of them. He'll continue to be aware of his own mortality and the meaninglessness of the universe in ways that his old self was blissfully ignorant of. Or he can have the crayon put back. He can return to being the old Homer, the fool, the buffoon, the man who can't spell philosophy. He'll lose his connection with Lisa. He'll lose his ability to see the world clearly, but he'll regain his happiness. He'll regain his friends. He'll regain his ability to enjoy a donut without thinking about its nutritional implications. He'll regain the warm, comfortable blanket of not knowing. Homer chooses the crayon. He asks Moe, who is apparently an unlicensed surgeon on the side, to reinsert it. He chooses to become the fool again. But before the procedure, Homer does something that elevates this episode from very good to genuinely great. He writes a letter to Lisa. He writes it while he's still smart, while he can still articulate what he wants to say. And in that letter, he tells her that the best part of being smart was finally understanding how wonderful she is. He tells her he's sorry for the choice he's about to make. He tells her he loves her in a way that the old, dumb Homer could never put into words. And then he lets the crayon go back in, and he goes back to being the man who can barely form a coherent sentence. Lisa finds the letter later, and she cries. And the viewer cries too if they have any soul at all. Because what Homer has done is not just choose ignorance over knowledge. He's made a conscious, informed, deliberate decision that happiness matters more than understanding. He's been Socrates dissatisfied, and he's been the fool satisfied. He's experienced both states, and he's chosen the fool's life, not out of ignorance because he made the choice while still possessing intelligence, but as a fully aware, fully informed decision that contentment is worth more to him than clarity. The American Philosophical Association has published analysis of this episode on their blog. It's been used in university philosophy courses across the country to teach Mill's distinction between higher and lower pleasures. The blog post, written for the APA's Teaching and Learning video series, specifically frames the episode as a challenge to Mill's famous claim. Mill said it's better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied. Homer has been both. Homer chose the fool. And the devastating thing, the thing that makes this episode linger in your mind long after the credits roll, is that you can't easily say Homer was wrong. Because look at what intelligence gave him. Yes, it gave him a bond with Lisa. That was beautiful and real. But it also gave him isolation from his friends, anxiety about his job, awareness of problems he couldn't solve, and a general sense of disconnection from the life he'd been happily living for decades. Intelligence made the world clearer but also colder. It made Homer more capable but less content. It made him better at understanding life but worse at enjoying it. The inspiration for this episode, Daniel Keyes' Flowers for Algernon, reaches a different conclusion. In that story, the protagonist, Charlie, doesn't choose to lose his intelligence. It fades on its own as the experimental treatment wears off. And that loss is portrayed as tragic, as something terrible happening to someone who doesn't want it. Homer's story is different because Homer does choose. He actively decides to go backward. He actively prefers the darkness to the light. And the show, remarkably, doesn't punish him for it. It doesn't present his choice as cowardly or wrong. It presents it as understandable, as human, as perhaps even wise in its own way. The letter to Lisa is what saves Homer's choice from being mere cowardice. Without the letter, you could argue that Homer is just running away from the difficulty of being aware. But the letter shows that Homer understands what he's giving up. He knows that his choice will hurt Lisa. He knows that he's turning his back on a deeper connection with his daughter. He knows all of this and he chooses happiness anyway. And then he tells Lisa he's sorry, which is an act of love and honesty that the old, dumb Homer could never have managed. The last thing smart Homer does is something that dumb Homer will never know about. He gives Lisa an apology and an explanation that she'll carry with her even though her father won't remember writing it. There's a version of Nietzsche's philosophy that would condemn Homer's choice as an act of weakness. Nietzsche talked about the Übermensch, the overman or superman, who embraces the full weight of existence without flinching. The Übermensch doesn't retreat into comfortable illusions. The Übermensch doesn't choose the easy path. The Übermensch faces reality head-on and creates meaning through sheer force of will. By this standard, Homer's choice to reinsert the crayon is a surrender. It's a choosing slave morality in Nietzsche's terms over the heroic burden of truth. But the show doesn't frame it that way. The show frames it as a man making a reasonable, compassionate choice about his own life. Homer isn't trying to be a hero. He isn't trying to be an overman. He's trying to be happy. And the show, quietly, without making a big deal about it, suggests that there might be something noble about that choice too. Not noble in the way that philosophers usually mean the word. Not noble like a Nietzschean hero or a Socratic martyr. Noble in a smaller, warmer, more human way. The nobility of a man who knows his own limits and chooses to live within them rather than be destroyed by reaching beyond them. This is the philosophical heart of Homer Simpson. Not that ignorance is bliss, though the show flirts with that idea constantly, but that happiness is a legitimate goal, not a consolation prize. That the examined life might not be the only life worth living. That knowing the truth about the universe is not automatically more valuable than feeling joy while eating a donut. These are radical claims, and the show makes them not through argument, but through the lived experience of a character we've watched for decades. We know Homer. We know his happiness is real. We know his love for his family is real. And that reality challenges the philosophical tradition that says knowledge is always better than ignorance. Let that thought settle for a moment. We'll come back to it throughout the night from different angles, looking at it through different philosophical lenses. But for now, just let it sit. Is it better to know and suffer, or to not know and be at peace? Homer has his answer. You don't need to have yours tonight. These are questions you can carry with you into sleep, turning them over slowly in the dark. The Homer episode isn't the first time the show explored Homer's relationship with meaning and despair. In fact, it happened much earlier, in the show's very first season, in only the third episode ever aired. And that earlier episode explored a much darker version of this question. It explored what happens when even Homer, the fool at peace, loses his ability to find meaning in anything at all. The episode is called Homer's Odyssey. It's Season 1, Episode 3, which means it aired on January 21st, 1990. The Simpsons had only existed as a standalone show for about 5 weeks at that point. The animation was rougher. The voices were still finding their rhythm. The show hadn't yet become the cultural institution it would eventually become. And yet, in this very early episode, the writers did something remarkable. They took their bumbling, lovable protagonist and they pushed him all the way to the edge of human despair. They made Homer contemplate suicide. Here's what happens. Bart's class takes a field trip to the Springfield nuclear power plant where Homer works. During the visit, Homer is distracted by Bart waving at him from the tour group, and he crashes his cart into a nuclear waste pipe. He's fired. Homer comes home humiliated and ashamed. He's lost his income. He's lost his sense of purpose. He can't provide for his family. What follows is a descent into depression that, despite the show's cartoon format, feels genuinely real. Homer sits around the house in his bathrobe. He watches television without seeing it. He eats without tasting. The simple pleasures that usually sustain him, the beer, the couch, the TV, they don't work anymore. They've lost their ability to numb him. For the first time in the show, we see Homer without his happiness, and what's underneath is frightening. Under the fool's contentment, there's despair. Under the laughter and the donuts, there's a man who doesn't believe his life has any value. Homer writes his family a farewell note. He goes out to the backyard. He ties one end of a rope around his waist and the other end around a large boulder. And then, carrying the boulder in his arms, he walks through the streets of Springfield toward a bridge, intending to jump. This is the third episode of a cartoon comedy. This is a show that 3 episodes in is already asking its audience to watch a fat yellow cartoon man carry a rock to a bridge so he can kill himself. The audacity of that creative choice is almost as significant as the philosophical implications of what happens next. Marge and the kids find his note and chase after him. They reach the bridge just as Homer is about to jump. They shout for him to stop. He turns around, and as his family rushes toward him, they all cross a dangerous intersection without looking. A car nearly hits them. Homer drops the boulder and pushes his family out of the way, saving their lives. And then he looks at the intersection and says something that changes everything. He says, "This intersection is really dangerous. Someone should put a stop sign here." And just like that, Homer has a purpose again. Not a grand purpose, not a cosmic purpose, not a purpose handed down by God or discovered through philosophical contemplation. A small, practical, ordinary purpose. Make this one intersection a little bit safer. That's it. That's enough. What follows is a montage of Homer becoming a safety advocate. He petitions City Hall for a stop sign. His petition is accepted. He campaigns for more safety improvements across Springfield. He stages a protest outside the nuclear power plant. Mr. Burns, impressed by Homer's passion and hoping to neutralize the threat, offers Homer a new job as the plant's safety inspector. Homer accepts. He goes from suicidal to purposeful, from despair to meaning, because he noticed a dangerous intersection while trying to kill himself. This episode, primitive as it is in terms of the show's later sophistication, contains a philosophical idea that would make Albert Camus very interested. Camus was a French-Algerian philosopher and author who lived from 1913 to 1960. He's best known for a book called The Myth of Sisyphus and for a novel called The Stranger. Camus was part of a philosophical movement sometimes called absurdism, which is related to existentialism but has its own distinct character. And the central question of Camus's philosophy is exactly the question Homer faces at that bridge. Camus wrote that the fundamental philosophical question is whether or not life is worth living. That's it. That's the big one. Everything else, he said, is secondary. You can figure out whether the universe has meaning later. You can figure out God and morality and politics later. First, you have to answer the basic question of whether you should continue to exist. And Camus recognized that this question is harder than it sounds, because once you strip away all the comfortable illusions, all the religious promises, all the cultural distractions, you're left with what he called the absurd. The absurd, for Camus, is the gap between what humans want and what the universe provides. Humans want meaning, purpose, justice, and order. The universe provides none of these things. The universe is indifferent. It doesn't care whether you live or die, whether you're happy or miserable, whether you find meaning or spend your life in confusion. This gap between human need and cosmic indifference is the absurd. And once you recognize it, once you really see it, you have to decide what to do about it. Camus used the Greek myth of Sisyphus to illustrate his answer. Sisyphus was a king who was punished by the gods. His punishment was to push a huge boulder up a hill, and every time he reached the top, the boulder would roll back down and he'd have to start again. Forever, no progress, no completion, no end, just the same meaningless task repeated for eternity. Most people read this myth as a picture of futility and despair, but Camus read it differently. Camus wrote that we must imagine Sisyphus happy, not because his task has meaning, because it doesn't. Not because the gods will eventually set him free, because they won't, but because the act of pushing the boulder, the struggle itself, can be enough. Sisyphus knows his task is meaningless. He knows the boulder will always roll back down. But he pushes it anyway, and in that defiant act of continuing despite the meaninglessness, there is something that looks very much like courage, something that looks like joy. Homer Simpson is Sisyphus. He pushes his boulder up the hill every single episode. He makes mistakes, he fails, he causes catastrophes, he ruins things for himself and everyone around him. And at the end of the episode, the boulder rolls back down. Everything resets. Homer doesn't learn. He doesn't grow. He doesn't become a better person. Next week, he'll make the same mistakes all over again. But here's the difference between Homer and the traditional reading of Sisyphus. Camus had to ask us to imagine Sisyphus happy. We have to make an intellectual leap to see joy in Sisyphus's endless, pointless labor. But Homer actually is happy. We don't have to imagine it. We can see it. We can hear it in his woo-hoo when something goes right. We can see it in his face when he sits down on the couch after a long day. We can feel it in his embrace when he hugs Marge or carries Maggie. Homer doesn't need anyone to imagine him happy. He's already there, and he finds purpose the same way Camus said we should. Not by discovering a cosmic purpose that was always there waiting for us. Not by having God or destiny hand us a mission, but by creating meaning out of whatever is in front of us. Homer doesn't find a stop sign at that intersection. He decides that intersection needs a stop sign. The purpose doesn't come from outside. It comes from Homer's response to his immediate surroundings. He sees a problem and he decides to fix it, and that decision gives his life meaning. This pattern repeats throughout the entire run of the show. Homer doesn't have a stable, permanent sense of purpose. His meaning comes and goes. It shifts from episode to episode, from moment to moment. One week, his purpose is to win a bowling tournament. The next week, it's to impress his boss. The next week, it's to help Bart with a school project. These purposes are temporary, small, and often absurd, but they're real to Homer in the moment, and that's what matters. There's another episode that illustrates this even more beautifully. It's called A Tree Grows in Springfield from season 24. In this episode, Homer is deeply depressed. He's won a tablet computer in a raffle at his kid's school and become obsessed with it, but then he falls and breaks it. Losing this small possession sends him into a spiral of hopelessness. He feels like nothing in his life works. Nothing goes right. Nothing has any point. Then his neighbor, Ned Flanders, makes a discovery. On the Simpsons' backyard tree, the word hope has appeared, written in sap. Everyone in the neighborhood sees it as a miracle. Homer is overjoyed. The word hope on his tree feels like a message from the universe, a sign that things will get better, that his life has meaning after all. But then a reporter named Kent Brockman gets involved. Brockman, always looking for a story, finds thermal camera footage that shows someone walking into the Simpsons' backyard at night and writing hope on the tree with maple syrup. It's not a miracle. It's a person with a bottle of syrup. Homer is devastated all over again. But Marge consoles him. She points out that someone wrote that word on their tree. Someone was watching. Someone cared enough to give Homer a message of hope when he needed it most. Even if it's not a miracle, it's still meaningful. Someone wanted Homer to feel better. And that's something. The episode ends with a reveal that is both funny and profoundly moving. The person who wrote hope on the tree is Homer himself. Sleepwalking Homer. Unconscious Homer. Homer, in his sleep, walked to the tree and wrote the word he needed most to see. He gave himself the message of hope that he couldn't find anywhere else. He created, unconsciously, and without any philosophical framework to guide him, the meaning that his conscious mind was desperately seeking. This is existentialism in its purest and most tender form. Existentialism says that meaning doesn't exist out there in the universe waiting to be discovered. Meaning is something you create through your choices, your actions, your commitments. The universe is indifferent, but you don't have to be. You can write hope on your own tree. You can create the meaning you need even if nobody else provides it, even if you have to do it in your sleep, even if you don't know you're doing it. Jean-Paul Sartre, one of the founders of existentialist philosophy, said that existence precedes essence. What he meant was that humans don't come into the world with a built-in purpose or meaning. We exist first, and then we create our essence, our meaning, through the choices we make. There's no cosmic blueprint. There's no destiny. There's just you in a universe that doesn't care, choosing to care anyway. Homer doesn't know Sartre's philosophy. Homer has never heard of existentialism, but Homer lives existentialism more fully than most people who have. He creates meaning constantly, without effort, without awareness, without the paralyzing self-consciousness that makes so many people unable to commit to anything. He just lives. He just loves. He just does the thing in front of him, whatever it is, and finds enough meaning in it to keep going. And when the meaning disappears, when the boulder rolls back to the bottom of the hill, Homer starts pushing again. Not because he's made a philosophical decision to embrace the absurd, but because it's Tuesday and there's a donut in the kitchen and Marge needs him to fix the disposal. Camus also wrote a novel called The Stranger about a man named Meursault, who is completely indifferent to the expectations of society. Meursault doesn't cry at his mother's funeral. He doesn't express emotion when expected to. He lives entirely in the present moment, responding to immediate sensory experience rather than social convention. When he's asked if he loves his girlfriend, he says he supposes he doesn't because love is a word that doesn't mean anything to him. Meursault is, in many ways, an intellectual version of Homer. He's someone who exists outside the normal frameworks of meaning and emotion that society expects. But Meursault is also deeply alienated and ultimately destroyed by his indifference. Society punishes him for not playing by the rules. He's sentenced to death, not really for the crime he committed, but for failing to grieve properly at his mother's funeral. Homer is a gentler, warmer version of Meursault. He too lives in the present moment. He too fails to meet society's expectations. He too doesn't always express the emotions that are expected of him. But where Meursault's indifference is cold and alienating, Homer's is warm and inclusive. Homer's inability to conform to social expectations doesn't isolate him the way Meursault's does. It actually endears him to people. His family loves him despite his failures. His friends accept him despite his limitations. His community tolerates him despite his constant screw-ups. The difference is that Homer has something Meursault doesn't. Homer has love. Not sophisticated love. Not romantic love in the way poets write about it. Not intellectual love in the way philosophers theorize about it. Just simple, stubborn, unexamined love for the people in his life. He loves Marge. He loves Bart and Lisa and Maggie. He loves his friends. He loves his town. He loves his couch. He loves his life even when his life is objectively terrible. And this love, primitive as it is, keeps him connected to the world in a way that prevents his absurd existence from becoming tragic. If this is helping you drift off tonight, a subscribe really does help us keep making these. No pressure at all. You're welcome here either way. Homer's ability to create meaning out of nothing, to find purpose in a dangerous intersection or hope in a sleepwalking message on a tree, tells us something important about human nature. We are meaning-making creatures. We can't help it. Even when the universe gives us nothing to work with, we take whatever is in front of us and turn it into a reason to keep going. Homer does this instinctively, without philosophy, without religion, without therapy. He just does it because he's human, and that's what humans do. But the show doesn't let Homer off the hook entirely. It knows that Homer's contentment, his ability to bounce back and find meaning in small things, exists alongside some very real limitations. Homer's ignorance protects him, yes, but it also costs him. And nowhere are those costs more visible, nowhere is the philosophical tension more sharp than in an episode that deliberately set out to deconstruct everything about Homer's existence. An episode that asks the brutal question that everyone thinks but nobody says out loud. Why does Homer Simpson deserve his life? The episode is called Homer's Enemy. It's Season 8, Episode 23. It originally aired on May 4th, 1997, and it was written by John Swartzwelder, the most prolific writer in the show's history, with a credit on 59 episodes. The episode was directed by Jim Reardon, and what they created together is one of the darkest, most philosophically challenging episodes in the show's entire run. An episode that introduces a character specifically designed to be the rational, sane response to Homer Simpson's absurd, charmed life. That character is Frank Grimes. Frank Grimes, or Grimy as Homer calls him, despite Grimes' obvious hatred of the nickname, is the anti-Homer. His life has been nothing but hardship. The show gives us his backstory in a news segment at the beginning of the episode. Grimes was abandoned by his parents at age 4. He was never adopted. He grew up in a series of foster homes and group shelters. He educated himself through correspondence courses, earning a degree in nuclear physics through years of solitary study. Everything he has, he earned through relentless hard work and determination. He's never been given anything. He's never caught a lucky break. He clawed his way up from nothing, and then he gets a job at the Springfield nuclear power plant. And he meets Homer Simpson. Homer Simpson, who sleeps at the controls of a nuclear reactor. Homer Simpson, who has no qualifications for his job and got it through a series of accidents and the whims of his employer, Mr. Burns. Homer Simpson, who eats on the job, drinks on the job, and regularly causes safety violations that should have killed everyone in the plant multiple times over. Homer Simpson, who despite all of this lives in a large house in a nice neighborhood. Homer Simpson, who has a beautiful, patient, loving wife. Homer Simpson, who has 3 children. Homer Simpson, who has, the show reveals in a series of photographs on his wall, been to space, won a Grammy Award, performed with a barbershop quartet, and toured with a rock band. Frank Grimes looks at all of this and he can't process it. It doesn't compute. He has worked harder than Homer. He's smarter than Homer. He's more responsible, more disciplined, more deserving by every metric that society claims to value. And yet Homer has a better life than Grimes in every measurable way. Homer has more money, a bigger house, a happier family, and a longer list of extraordinary experiences, and he achieved all of it through incompetence, luck, and a complete absence of effort. Grimes is furious, not just annoyed or frustrated, but existentially enraged. Homer's existence is an affront to everything Grimes believes about how the world works. The world is supposed to be fair. Hard work is supposed to be rewarded. Incompetence is supposed to be punished. Merit is supposed to determine outcomes. These are the foundational assumptions of Grimes's worldview, the beliefs that kept him going through decades of hardship. If you just work hard enough, if you're just good enough, you'll eventually get what you deserve. Homer's existence proves that none of this is true. The world isn't fair. Hard work isn't reliably rewarded. Incompetence can be rewarded just as easily as competence, maybe more so. Merit has very little to do with outcomes. Homer Simpson, the laziest, most incompetent man in Springfield, has a better life than Frank Grimes, the hardest working, most qualified man Frank Grimes has ever been. The philosophical concept at work here is what Albert Camus called the absurd, applied not to the cosmic scale, but to the social scale. Grimes wants the world to make sense. He wants a rational connection between effort and reward, between virtue and outcome. The universe, as represented by Homer's charmed life, provides no such connection. Homer succeeds not because of what he does, but in spite of it. His life is absurd in the philosophical sense. There's no rational explanation for why things keep working out for him. They just do. And here's the crucial part. Grimes' response to this absurdity destroys him. He becomes obsessed with exposing Homer as a fraud. He tries to humiliate Homer publicly. He enters Homer in a children's model building contest, hoping Homer will embarrass himself with a childish entry while surrounded by actual children who built better models. But Homer wins the contest. Of course he does. Because the universe of The Simpsons operates by Homer's rules, not Grimes'. In a fit of rage and desperation, Grimes grabs high-voltage electrical wires without wearing safety gloves, screaming, "I'm Homer Simpson." He's electrocuted and killed. At the funeral, Homer falls asleep in the front pew and mumbles about changing the channel. Everyone laughs. The end. This episode is uncomfortable because it forces the viewer to confront something they usually don't have to think about. We love Homer. We root for Homer. We want Homer to be happy. But Frank Grimes is right. By any rational, meritocratic standard, Homer doesn't deserve his life. He hasn't earned it. He hasn't worked for it. He's coasted on luck and privilege and the mysterious benevolence of a fictional universe that keeps letting him get away with everything. And when someone who has actually earned their place confronts this injustice, the universe kills that person and lets Homer sleep through the funeral. What makes this episode philosophically important is what it reveals about two different approaches to living in an absurd world. Grimes represents the rational approach. He demands that the world make sense. He insists on fairness and merit and logical consequences. When the world fails to meet these demands, when reality refuses to conform to his expectations, Grimes is destroyed. He can't adapt. He can't accept the absurdity. He fights against it until the fight kills him. Homer represents the opposite approach. He doesn't demand anything of the world. He doesn't expect fairness or merit or logical consequences. He doesn't even notice that his life is absurd, that his good fortune is unearned, that his continued survival is statistically impossible. He just lives. He just is. And because he doesn't fight the absurdity, because he doesn't rage against the indifference of the universe, the absurdity doesn't destroy him. He survives. He thrives. He sleeps through the funeral of the man who was destroyed by the very injustice that Homer embodies. In Camus' framework, Homer is the healthier response to absurdity. Not because Homer is morally superior to Grimes, because he clearly isn't, but because Homer doesn't try to impose rational order on an irrational universe. He accepts reality as it comes without demanding that it conform to any particular structure or meaning. He doesn't need the world to be fair. He doesn't need his success to be deserved. He just takes what comes and enjoys it. And this, paradoxically, is a form of philosophical maturity that Grimes, for all his intelligence and hard work, never achieves. The episode is also a commentary on something broader than just philosophy. It's a commentary on the American dream and the myth of meritocracy. Grimes believed that America works the way it says it works, that hard work leads to success, that talent and determination are rewarded. Homer proves that America doesn't always work this way. Some people succeed through luck and circumstance and being in the right place at the right time. Some people fail despite doing everything right. The universe doesn't care about your work ethic. It doesn't keep score. This is a dark message, but the show delivers it through comedy, which makes it bearable. We laugh at Homer sleeping through the funeral because the alternative is to cry about the unfairness that the episode has just shown us. The laughter is a coping mechanism, a way of processing a truth that, presented straight, would be unbearable. Grimes is right about the world being unfair, but being right didn't help him. It destroyed him. Homer is wrong about almost everything, but being wrong seems to be working out just fine. Let that thought settle for a while. It's a complicated one, and it connects to something we discussed earlier, the question of whether truth always makes life better. Grimes' truth, the truth about the unfairness of the world, was poison. Homer's ignorance of that truth was medicine. The show doesn't say ignorance is better than knowledge in some simple, moralistic way. It just shows us two people, one who sees reality clearly and one who doesn't, and it asks which one you'd rather be. Homer's relationship with ignorance is complicated, and it runs deeper than just not knowing things. Homer's ignorance isn't just intellectual, it's emotional too. He doesn't carry grudges. He doesn't ruminate on his failures. He doesn't lie awake at night replaying his mistakes. Each day is essentially new for Homer, a blank page on which he writes whatever comes to mind, usually in crayon, and whatever happened yesterday has already faded into something he can't quite remember and doesn't particularly want to. This quality makes Homer frustrating as a husband and father because it means he never learns from his mistakes. But it also makes him remarkably resilient because he never accumulates the weight of past failures the way most people do. This connects to another rich vein of philosophical thought, and it's one that might seem surprising in the context of a cartoon character. But as we go deeper into the night and the ideas get quieter and more reflective, it's worth spending some time thinking about Homer's relationship with his family, and particularly with the person in his family who understands him least and loves him most. Homer and Lisa Simpson are the emotional center of The Simpsons. Not Homer and Marge, though that relationship is important. Not Homer and Bart, though that relationship gets a lot of screen time. Homer and Lisa, the fool and the philosopher, the man who knows nothing and the girl who knows too much. Their relationship is the show's deepest philosophical statement because it embodies the tension between two fundamentally different ways of being alive. Lisa is 8 years old. She's a genius, an intellectual prodigy, a passionate advocate for justice, a vegetarian, a Buddhist, a jazz musician, and probably the most ethically serious person in Springfield. She reads Sylvia Plath. She watches documentaries about war crimes. She worries about the environment, about political corruption, about the state of public education, about factory farming, about wealth inequality, about all the things that are wrong with the world that nobody else in her family can even name. She's brilliant and she's miserable. Not always miserable, but often, because her intelligence shows her things she can't unsee, and her moral sensitivity makes her feel responsible for things she can't fix. Homer is Homer. He loves donuts and beer and television and napping and his family, more or less in that order, depending on the day. He can barely spell his own name some days. He once forgot that he had a daughter named Maggie. He has caused more property damage than most natural disasters. And he is, in his confused, clumsy, inarticulate way, one of the most loving fathers in television. The book The Simpsons and Philosophy includes an essay called Lisa, an American Anti-Intellectualism by Aeon J. Scoble. In that essay, Scoble examines how American culture has a complicated, often hostile relationship with intellectuals. On one hand, Americans respect expertise in education. On the other hand, there's a deep cultural suspicion of people who are too smart, who use big words, who look down on ordinary pleasures. Lisa embodies this tension. She's often right about things. She's often the only person in the room who understands what's actually happening. But she's also often portrayed as preachy, as sanctimonious, as unable to just relax and enjoy life. Her intelligence isolates her. Her moral seriousness exhausts the people around her. She's the smartest person in Springfield, and she's also one of the loneliest. Homer, by contrast, is adored, not despite his ignorance, but in some ways because of it. His simplicity makes him approachable. His lack of pretension makes people comfortable around him. His inability to judge others, mostly because he lacks the framework to judge, makes him accepting in a way that more intelligent people often aren't. Homer doesn't care if you're smart or dumb, rich or poor, conventional or eccentric. He's too busy thinking about lunch to have opinions about your lifestyle choices. The relationship between Homer and Lisa is the show's way of exploring whether intelligence and happiness are inversely correlated. Not just in the Homer episode where this is made explicit through a graph, but throughout the entire series. Lisa is smart and sad. Homer is dumb and happy. Lisa understands the world and is burdened by that understanding. Homer misunderstands the world and is liberated by that misunderstanding. Lisa tries to fix problems and is frustrated when she can't. Homer doesn't see most problems and is therefore unbothered by them. But here's where the show gets genuinely deep. Because despite these differences, despite the gap between them that seems impossible to bridge, Homer and Lisa love each other. And the way they love each other reveals something important about what love actually is. In the episode Lisa's Substitute from Season 2, Lisa's regular teacher becomes ill and is replaced by a substitute named Mr. Bergstrom, voiced by Dustin Hoffman using a pseudonym. Mr. Bergstrom is everything Lisa has always wanted in an authority figure. He's intelligent, creative, passionate, and he treats Lisa as an intellectual equal. For the first time in her life, Lisa has a teacher who sees her, who understands her, who meets her where she is. She develops a deep crush on Mr. Bergstrom, the kind of crush that 8-year-olds get on adults who make them feel valued. But Mr. Bergstrom is a substitute. He leaves. Lisa is devastated. She comes home in tears and confronts Homer, who has been oblivious to her emotional journey throughout the entire episode. Homer has been dealing with his own subplot, helping Bart run for class president, and he hasn't noticed that Lisa is going through a crisis. When Lisa finally breaks down in front of him, when she tells him through tears that he can't possibly understand what she's going through, Homer is lost. He doesn't know what to say. He doesn't have the words. He doesn't have the intellectual framework to address Lisa's emotional and intellectual needs. But then he does something that no amount of intelligence could have done better. He sits down next to Lisa. He doesn't try to explain or analyze or fix. He just tells her simply and directly that she is Lisa Simpson. That's all. And then he hands her a note that missed her. Bergstrom left for her before he went. The note says the same thing. You are Lisa Simpson. Now, on the surface, this seems like nothing. You are Lisa Simpson. That's not advice. That's not a philosophical insight. It's not even a complete thought. But in the context of what Lisa needs in that moment, it's everything. She doesn't need someone to explain her feelings or tell her how to process them. She doesn't need intellectual engagement. She needs to be seen. She needs to be told that who she is, with all her intelligence and all her sadness and all her passionate caring about the world, is enough. She needs someone to say, "You're you, and that's good." Homer can't articulate why this is what Lisa needs. He probably doesn't even know why he said it. But his instinct, his emotional intelligence, which operates on a completely different frequency than his intellectual intelligence, gives Lisa exactly what she needs when nothing else could. This moment reveals something that the Western philosophical tradition has sometimes struggled with. There are forms of wisdom that don't look like wisdom. There are kind of understanding that can't be measured by IQ tests or demonstrated through logical argument. Homer's emotional intelligence, his ability to sense what the people he loves need and to provide it without knowing why, is a genuine form of knowing. It's just not the kind of knowing that philosophers and academics tend to value. The philosopher Martha Nussbaum has written extensively about the role of emotions in ethics, arguing that emotional responses are not just feelings but forms of judgment. When we feel compassion for someone who is suffering, that compassion isn't just a warm feeling in our chest. It's a moral judgment that this person's suffering matters and that we should do something about it. By this standard, Homer's emotional responses to his family's needs, his instinctive moves to comfort and protect and reassure, are genuine moral acts, even though Homer couldn't articulate the moral reasoning behind them if his life depended on it. The tension between Homer and Lisa also reflects a broader philosophical debate about what kind of knowledge matters most. Western philosophy, since at least Socrates, has prioritized rational, intellectual knowledge, knowing that something is true, being able to prove it, being able to articulate your reasoning. This kind of knowledge is the gold standard of the philosophical tradition. But there are other kinds of knowledge. There's practical knowledge, the kind that lets you fix a car or cook a meal. There's emotional knowledge, the kind that lets you sense what someone is feeling without being told. There's social knowledge, the kind that lets you navigate relationships and communities. Homer lacks intellectual knowledge almost entirely, but he possesses emotional and social knowledge in abundance. He knows how to make people laugh. He knows how to make Marge feel loved, at least some of the time. He knows how to comfort his children when they're hurting, even if he can't help them with their homework. The relationship between Homer and Lisa reaches its emotional peak in the episode And Maggie Makes Three, which we discussed earlier, the Do It For Her plaque. But it's worth revisiting this moment from Lisa's perspective, not just Homer's. Because for Lisa, that plaque represents something she can barely allow herself to believe. That her father, this man she loves and is frustrated by in equal measure, is capable of a depth of feeling that he will never, ever be able to express in words. The photos of Maggie covering the demotivational plaque are Homer's language. They're how he speaks when words fail him. And they say something more eloquent than anything Homer has ever said out loud. Lisa understands this. She understands at some level that maybe she can't fully articulate either, that her father's love is real even if it can't pass a philosophy exam, that love doesn't need to be intelligent to be genuine, that the heart doesn't need the mind's permission to feel. This understanding costs Lisa something because it means accepting that the father she has, with all his limitations, is the father she's got. She'll never have a father who can discuss Kierkegaard with her over breakfast. She'll never have a father who reads the books she reads or appreciates the music she plays. But she has a father who would cover a demotivational plaque with photos of his baby just to remind himself why he gets up in the morning. And maybe, the show suggests, maybe that's enough. Maybe that's more than enough. Maybe that's the thing that matters most. There's a scene that captures this beautifully. It happens in the episode where Homer discovers the crayon in his brain, the Homer episode we discussed earlier. When Homer is smart, when the crayon has been removed and he can finally think clearly, the first person he seeks out is Lisa. He wants to connect with her. He wants to understand her world. And they have a beautiful conversation, a real meeting of minds, and Lisa is overjoyed. But then Homer chooses the crayon. He chooses to go back. And Lisa has to watch her father become, once again, the man who can't keep up with her. But she has the letter Homer wrote while he was still smart. The letter that says the best part of being intelligent was understanding how wonderful she is. That letter is a bridge between Homer's two selves. It proves that somewhere inside the man who can barely spell his own name, there is someone who sees Lisa completely. Someone who understands her brilliance and her loneliness and her need to be appreciated. That person is buried under a crayon and a lifetime of Duff beer, but he's there. And the letter is the proof. The show uses Homer and Lisa's relationship to make a philosophical argument that it never states explicitly. The argument is this: love matters more than understanding. Connection matters more than comprehension. You don't have to understand someone to love them well. You don't have to share their intellectual world to share their emotional world. Homer and Lisa live in different intellectual universes, but they live in the same emotional universe. And in the end, the show suggests the emotional universe is the one that matters. This is a radical claim, philosophically speaking. The entire Western tradition, from Socrates forward, has been built on the idea that understanding is the foundation of the good life. Know thyself, Socrates said. The unexamined life is not worth living. Knowledge is virtue. Virtue is knowledge. To know the good is to do the good. All of this assumes that intellectual understanding is primary, that it's the thing everything else depends on. Homer and Lisa's relationship suggests otherwise. It suggests that love can exist and even flourish without understanding, that the fool's love for his brilliant daughter is no less real, no less valuable, no less important than any love that's grounded in intellectual compatibility. Let's sit with this thought for a moment as we transition to something a little different. We've been talking about Homer's relationships and his accidental encounters with big philosophical questions. But there's another dimension to Homer's character that we haven't explored yet, his relationship with pleasure. Because Homer isn't just a fool, he's a happy fool. And his happiness comes, more than anything else, from his ability to take pleasure in simple things. This connects him to one of the most misunderstood philosophical traditions in history. Epicurus was an ancient Greek philosopher who lived from 341 to 270 BCE. He founded a school of philosophy called, naturally enough, Epicureanism. And Epicureanism has gotten a bad reputation over the centuries, mostly because people misunderstand what it actually says. When most people hear the word Epicurean, they think of someone who loves luxury, fine dining, expensive wine, 5-star hotels. An Epicurean in popular usage is a pleasure seeker, a hedonist, someone who lives for sensory indulgence. But that's not what Epicurus taught at all. Epicurus believed that the goal of life was pleasure, yes, but his definition of pleasure was much more subtle than most people realize. The highest pleasure for Epicurus was not wild sensory indulgence. It was ataraxia, a Greek word that means tranquility, calmness, freedom from anxiety and disturbance. Epicurus believed that the best life was a life of simple pleasures enjoyed in peace. Good food, but not elaborate feasts. Good company, but not frantic socializing. A comfortable home, but not a palace. The pleasures Epicurus valued most were the pleasures of friendship, of philosophical conversation, of a garden where you could sit in the shade and think. Epicurus also taught that the pursuit of excessive wealth, power, and status actually caused more pain than pleasure. When you pursue luxury, you develop a taste for luxury, and then you need more and more of it to feel satisfied. This is the hedonic treadmill, a concept that modern psychologists have confirmed empirically, but that Epicurus identified purely through observation over 2,000 years ago. The more you have, the more you need. The higher your standards rise, the harder it becomes to meet them. The person who can enjoy a simple meal in their garden is happier than the person who needs a 5-course dinner at a Michelin-starred restaurant, because the first person's happiness is easy to maintain, while the second person's happiness requires constant, escalating investment. Homer Simpson is an accidental Epicurean. Not a perfect one, because Homer definitely overindulges in ways that Epicurus wouldn't approve of. But the core structure of Homer's happiness, the things that actually make him content, aligns remarkably well with Epicurus's philosophy. What makes Homer happy? A donut, a Duff beer, his spot on the couch, his wife next to him, his kids in the house, a bowling game with his friends, a nap on a Sunday afternoon. These are not expensive pleasures. They're not exotic pleasures. They're not pleasures that require wealth or status or power to access. They're the most basic, most available, most democratic pleasures in the world. And Homer experiences them with more genuine satisfaction than most fictional characters experience their most extraordinary achievements. Homer's famous catchphrase is worth thinking about in this context. Donuts. Beer. Forbidden donut. Invisible cola. Floor pie. Each of these is an expression of complete, undivided pleasure. Homer doesn't analyze his pleasures. He doesn't rank them. He doesn't compare them to some theoretical ideal of what pleasure should be. He just experiences them fully and immediately, and the experience satisfies him. There's actually something almost meditative about Homer's relationship with food and drink. When he bites into a donut, the rest of the world disappears. His problems disappear. His worries disappear. There's just the donut. This sounds like a joke, and it is a joke, but it's also a surprisingly accurate description of mindful eating, a practice recommended by psychologists and meditation teachers. Mindful eating means paying full attention to the experience of eating, noticing the flavors and textures and sensations without judgment or distraction. It's a practice that most people find incredibly difficult because most people eat while doing other things, while watching television, while checking their phones, while worrying about their next meeting. Homer doesn't have this problem. Homer is naturally, instinctively, effortlessly mindful when it comes to food. He pays full attention because he doesn't have enough attention to split. Epicurus would have appreciated Homer's ability to enjoy simple pleasures, even if he would have worried about Homer's tendency to overdo it. Because Epicurus also taught moderation, and Homer is not moderate. He eats too much, drinks too much, and sleeps too much. Epicurus would have said that this excess undermines Homer's happiness rather than enhancing it. That Homer would actually be happier if he ate 1 donut instead of 12, drank 1 beer instead of 6, slept 8 hours instead of falling asleep at the controls of a nuclear reactor. And Epicurus would probably be right about that. The show acknowledges Homer's excesses as problems, not virtues. His drinking is clearly self-destructive. His eating causes health problems. His laziness puts his family at risk. Homer isn't a role model for how to pursue pleasure. He's an illustration of both the beauty and the danger of a pleasure-oriented life. The beauty is his capacity for genuine, uncomplicated joy. The danger is that joy, unmoderated, becomes self-destruction. But here's where Homer's story gets interesting in the Epicurean framework. Epicurus also taught that we shouldn't fear death, that we shouldn't spend our limited time worrying about things we can't control, and that we should value friendship above almost everything else. And Homer does all of these things, again, without knowing he's doing them. Homer doesn't fear death. This might be because he doesn't fully understand death, or because he's too busy thinking about lunch to worry about mortality, or because he's already been in so many near-death situations that the concept has lost its power. But whatever the reason, Homer doesn't spend his life afraid of dying. He doesn't wake up at 3 a.m. contemplating his own mortality. He doesn't have existential crises about the finite nature of human existence. He just lives day by day, donut by donut, and the question of death rarely enters his mind. Homer doesn't worry about things he can't control. Again, this might be because he doesn't understand most of the things that other people worry about. Climate change, political instability, economic recession. These concepts bounce off Homer like Nerf darts off a brick wall. He's not in denial about them. He simply doesn't think about them. And while this is intellectually irresponsible, it's also, from an Epicurean perspective, remarkably healthy. Epicurus taught that worrying about things you can't control is one of the primary sources of human suffering. Homer doesn't do this. Not because he's made a conscious decision to avoid unnecessary worry, but because his brain simply doesn't generate unnecessary worry. The crayon in his brain, metaphorically or literally, filters out the anxiety that plagues more intelligent minds. And Homer values friendship. He goes to Moe's tavern almost every night. He sits with Barney, Lenny, Carl, and Moe. They drink, they talk, they watch sports, they complain about their lives. It's not deep, it's not intellectually stimulating, but it's real, consistent, long-term friendship. Homer has maintained these friendships for decades. He shows up. He participates. He cares about these people in his rough, inarticulate way. When Barney is in trouble, Homer helps. When Lenny is sad, Homer notices. When Moe is suicidal, which happens more often than you'd think in a cartoon comedy, Homer is there. Epicurus lived in a garden with his friends. He called his school the Garden, and it was literally a place where he and his followers could gather, eat simple meals, and enjoy philosophical conversation in peaceful surroundings. Moe's Tavern is Homer's garden. It's not beautiful. It's not peaceful. The food is terrible and the beer is cheap. But it serves the same function that Epicurus' garden served. It's a place where friends gather, where the simple pleasure of companionship is available without pretension or demand. Homer doesn't go to Moe's to network or to advance his career or to be seen by important people. He goes because his friends are there and being with his friends makes him happy. Marge is the moderating force in Homer's Epicurean existence, and her role is crucial. Without Marge, Homer's pleasure-seeking would destroy him. He'd eat himself to death. He'd drink himself to death. He'd sleep through every opportunity and responsibility until there was nothing left. Marge provides the structure and discipline that Homer lacks. She makes sure the bills get paid. She makes sure the kids get to school. She makes sure Homer has clean clothes and food that isn't entirely composed of processed sugar. She is the container that holds Homer's chaos in check. This mirrors something Aristotle would recognize. The virtuous life requires balance, and Homer can't create balance on his own. He needs Marge to provide the balance he can't generate internally. Homer is the appetite, the pure drive toward pleasure and away from pain. Marge is the reason, the tempering force that keeps the appetite within livable bounds. Together they form something like a complete human being. Separately, they'd both be incomplete. Homer without Marge would be a hedonistic disaster. Marge without Homer would be, well, we've seen episodes where Marge is without Homer, and she's usually bored, repressed, and lacking the spontaneity and joy that Homer, for all his faults, brings into her life. The Epicurean dimension of Homer's character teaches us something that's worth thinking about as you settle deeper into the night. The simplest pleasures might be the most reliable ones. The most ordinary comforts might be the most sustaining. You don't need to climb Everest or win an Oscar or discover a new element to be happy. You might just need a donut, a couch, and someone who loves you sitting nearby. That's not the whole truth about happiness, of course. Lisa's intellect brings her pleasures that Homer will never experience. The joy of understanding a complex idea, the satisfaction of solving a difficult problem, the beauty of a piece of music that you have to work to appreciate. These are real pleasures and they matter. But Homer's pleasures are real too, and they're more available, more reliable, and more resistant to the forces that usually destroy happiness. Homer's donut doesn't depend on other people's opinions. Homer's couch doesn't require a PhD. Homer's happiness is built on a foundation that the world can't easily take away. Epicurus would have seen Homer as a case study in the dangers of excess, but also in the wisdom of simplicity. He would have said, this man has the right instincts but the wrong proportions. He knows what makes him happy, which is more than most people can say. He just needs a little moderation, a little temperance, a little discipline. And fortunately for Homer, he has Marge for that. If you're still with us, thank you for spending this time. And if you're starting to drift off, that's wonderful too. Just let the words carry you wherever they want to take you. There's no quiz at the end. Let's talk about something that philosophers don't discuss as much as they should. Resilience. The ability to take a hit and keep going. The ability to fail and try again. The ability to have everything go wrong on Monday and still get up on Tuesday. Because when it comes to resilience, Homer Simpson might be the most extraordinary character in the history of fiction. Not the most heroic, not the most admirable, but the most resilient. Think about what Homer has survived across over 770 episodes. He's been electrocuted more times than anyone can count. He's fallen off buildings, cliffs, towers, and rooftops. He's been shot into space and crash-landed back to Earth. He's been mauled by animals. He's been poisoned. He's been irradiated. He's been beaten up by everyone from professional boxers to his own father. He's lost his job at the nuclear plant and gotten it back more times than the show has bothered to count. He's nearly destroyed his marriage on multiple occasions. He's alienated his children, his friends, his neighbors, and his entire community. He's caused property damage that, if tallied up, would exceed the GDP of several small nations. He's accidentally started cults, crashed parades, ruined festivals, destroyed landmarks, and caused international incidents. And every single week, Homer bounces back. The house is repaired, the marriage is stable, the job is secure, the friendships are intact, the children love him, the town tolerates him, life goes on, Homer goes on. Now, yes, part of this is just the nature of episodic television. Sitcoms reset. That's how they work. If Homer permanently destroyed his marriage in season 4, there wouldn't be a season 5. The status quo has to be restored so the show can continue. This is a practical storytelling constraint, not a philosophical statement. But here's the thing. The way Homer bounces back, the effortlessness of his resilience, tells us something philosophically interesting about what allows some people to survive things that destroy others. And it connects to philosophical and psychological traditions that have been thinking about resilience for a very long time. There's a concept in Buddhist philosophy called non-attachment. The idea, simplified dramatically, is that suffering comes from attachment. We suffer when we cling to things, to outcomes, to identities, to the idea that our lives should look a certain way. When the thing we're attached to is threatened or lost, we suffer. The Buddhist solution is not to stop caring about things entirely, which is a common misunderstanding, but to hold things lightly, to appreciate them while they're present without clinging to the idea that they must always be present, to accept impermanence as the fundamental nature of reality. Homer practices non-attachment without knowing it. He doesn't carry grudges. He doesn't ruminate on past failures. He doesn't define himself by what he's lost or by what's gone wrong. Each day is essentially new for Homer. Whatever happened yesterday has faded into a pleasant fog. Whatever might happen tomorrow hasn't occurred to him yet. He exists in the present moment with an immediacy that most meditation teachers spend years trying to cultivate in their students. When Homer loses his job, he doesn't spend weeks in existential crisis about his identity as a worker or his ability to provide for his family. He mopes for a day, maybe 2, and then something else catches his attention and he moves on. When Homer fights with Marge, he doesn't rehash the argument for weeks, building resentment and compiling evidence for his side. He forgets what the fight was about by the next morning and makes Marge breakfast, poorly, but with genuine affection. When Homer fails at something, he doesn't internalize the failure as a statement about his worth as a person. He just shrugs and tries something else, or doesn't try anything else and eats a donut instead. Either way, the failure doesn't stick. It doesn't accumulate. It doesn't build into the kind of crushing weight that destroys people who take their failures seriously. This is profoundly healthy, psychologically speaking. Modern research on resilience consistently finds that the ability to let go of past failures, to avoid catastrophic thinking about the future, and to focus on the present moment are among the strongest predictors of psychological well-being. People who ruminate, who replay their mistakes over and over, who can't stop thinking about what might go wrong tomorrow, are significantly more likely to develop anxiety and depression. People who can let go, who can focus on what's in front of them, who can accept setbacks without catastrophizing, are significantly more resilient. Homer isn't resilient because he's strong. He's resilient because he's simple. His mind doesn't have the complexity to sustain rumination. He can't hold multiple threads of worry in his consciousness simultaneously the way more intelligent people can. His attention span is too short for sustained anxiety. His memory is too unreliable for grudges. His self-concept is too vague for the kind of identity crisis that comes from defining yourself by your achievements or failures. This simplicity is a double-edged sword, obviously. It means Homer never learns from his mistakes, which is why he keeps making them. It means he never develops the kind of self-awareness that would allow him to grow as a person. It means his relationships are stunted by his inability to engage with difficult emotions for extended periods. But it also means he's essentially indestructible, psychologically speaking. You can't break a man who doesn't hold on tight enough for the breaking to stick. The show's floating timeline reinforces this philosophical point in a structural way that's worth noting. In The Simpsons, nobody ages. Bart is always 10. Lisa is always 8. Homer is always somewhere in his mid to late 30s, though the exact age fluctuates. Maggie is always a baby. Time doesn't progress in Springfield. The seasons change, holidays come and go, but nobody gets older, nobody dies permanently, nothing changes in any lasting way. This structural choice, which the show has maintained since 1989, creates a narrative reality that mirrors Homer's psychological reality. Homer lives in an eternal present. There is no past weighing him down because the past keeps getting rewritten. There is no future to worry about because the future never arrives. There is just now, just this episode, just this adventure, this problem, this donut, this moment on the couch. The show's refusal to let time move forward is, philosophically, a statement about the kind of existence Homer represents. An existence without the burden of accumulated history. An existence where every day really is a fresh start. Friedrich Nietzsche, whom we mentioned briefly earlier, had a concept called eternal recurrence. The idea was that if you had to live your life over and over again, exactly the same, for all eternity, would you embrace that or despair at it? Nietzsche thought that the truly strong individual, the Übermensch, would embrace eternal recurrence, would say yes to their life, to every moment of it, even the painful ones, would want to live it all again infinitely. Homer lives eternal recurrence, not as a philosophical thought experiment, but as his actual narrative reality. He lives the same kinds of days over and over. He goes to work, comes home, drinks at Moe's, sits on the couch, gets into trouble, gets out of trouble, eats donuts, hugs his wife, yells at his kids, falls asleep. And he does it again, and again, and again, for over 35 years. And he doesn't just endure this repetition. He enjoys it. He doesn't get bored of the same couch, the same beer, the same friends, the same wife. Each experience feels fresh to him because his memory and attention don't burden him with the awareness that he's done all of this before. By Nietzsche's standard, Homer is the Übermensch, not because he's powerful or heroic or exceptional in any conventional sense, but because he says yes to his life totally and unreservedly without wanting to change it or escape it or be someone else. He doesn't wish he were smarter or richer or more accomplished. He doesn't dream of a different life. He's satisfied with the life he has, which is exactly the attitude Nietzsche said the strongest individual would adopt. Of course, Nietzsche meant something more active and deliberate by this. The Übermensch doesn't just passively accept life. The Übermensch actively creates values, actively imposes meaning, actively shapes the world. Homer doesn't do any of that. His acceptance of life is passive, instinctive, unexamined, but the result is the same. Homer loves his life. He wouldn't trade it for anything. And that love, passive though it may be, is exactly the kind of life affirmation that Nietzsche said was the highest human achievement. There's something humbling about this. All of Nietzsche's philosophizing about the will to power, all of his dramatic language about the death of God and the creation of new values, all of his insistence on heroic individual strength, and what it all comes down to is this: love your life. Say yes to it. Embrace it, including all its pain and absurdity and repetition. Homer does this without trying, without struggling, without even knowing he's doing it. He just sits on the couch, cracks open a duff, and says yes to the universe. Existence. This connects to something the Stoic philosophers talked about too. The Stoics, who were active in ancient Greece and Rome, believe that you should focus your energy on the things you can control and accept the things you can't. You can control your own actions, your own thoughts, your own attitudes. You can't control the weather, other people's behavior, the outcome of events, or the fact that you're going to die. The key to a good life, the Stoics said, was to stop wasting energy on the things you can't control and to put all your energy into the things you can. Homer doesn't waste energy on things he can't control. Not because he's made a Stoic decision to accept the uncontrollable, but because he's not aware enough to worry about most of the things that other people worry about. The effect is the same, though. Homer's energy goes into the things right in front of him: making breakfast, watching the game, drinking with his friends, hugging his wife. These are things Homer can control, and he puts his whole self into them. He doesn't split his attention between the present task and the 1,000 worries that intelligent people carry around like invisible backpacks. Now, I want to be careful here not to romanticize Homer's ignorance more than it deserves. Homer's resilience comes with real costs. Because he doesn't learn from his mistakes, he repeats them endlessly. Because he doesn't carry the weight of past failures, he also doesn't carry the lessons those failures could teach. Because he lives in an eternal present, he can't plan for the future, can't anticipate problems before they arise, can't protect his family from dangers he doesn't see coming. Homer's psychological invulnerability is real, but it's purchased at the price of growth, wisdom, and foresight. The show knows this. It doesn't present Homer's resilience as an uncomplicated good. It presents it as a trade-off. You can be resilient like Homer, bouncing back from everything because nothing sticks, but you'll never grow. Or you can be sensitive like Lisa, learning and growing and developing, but you'll carry the weight of everything you've learned, and that weight will sometimes feel unbearable. This is, in a quieter way, the same question the show keeps asking from different angles. The same question we keep coming back to. Happiness or wisdom? Contentment or awareness? The fool's resilience or the wise person's vulnerability? The show never chooses. It just holds both options up and lets you look at them. Let's turn now to something that brings several of these threads together. Homer's relationship with his family as a whole, not just with Lisa, but with everyone who shares his house. Because Homer's family relationships are where his philosophy, such as it is, gets tested most severely. It's easy to be a happy fool when you're alone. It's much harder when you're responsible for other people. And Homer's relationships reveal both the limits and the unexpected strengths of his way of being in the world. Homer and Marge's marriage is one of the great unlikely love stories in fiction. On paper, they make no sense. Marge is responsible, organized, patient, and morally serious. Homer is irresponsible, chaotic, impatient, and morally oblivious. Marge plans ahead. Homer can't plan past his next meal. Marge cares about what the neighbors think. Homer doesn't know what the neighbors think and wouldn't care if he did. Marge tries to maintain standards and routines and a sense of normalcy. Homer demolishes standards and routines and normalcy every chance he gets. And yet they love each other, genuinely, consistently, across more than 3 decades of television. Their love has been tested by infidelity, by temptation, by separation, by Homer's drinking, by Homer's stupidity, by Homer's inability to be the husband Marge deserves. And it has survived all of it, not because their love is magical or fated or supernatural, but because they keep choosing each other. Day after day, episode after episode, they choose to stay. They choose to try. They choose to forgive. They choose to keep going. This is love as an existentialist philosopher would understand it. Not love as a feeling, which comes and goes and can't be controlled. Not love as a state of being, which implies permanence and effortlessness. Love as a choice. Love as an act of will. Love is something you do, not something you have. Homer chooses Marge every day, not because he's made a philosophical commitment to the concept of marriage, but because he loves her, because loving her is the most important thing in his life, even if he can't always articulate that or act on it consistently. Marge chooses Homer every day too, and her choice is arguably the more remarkable one. Because Marge sees Homer clearly. She knows his faults. She knows his limitations. She's not operating under any illusions about who he is or what he's capable of. She has considered leaving him more than once. She has imagined a different life, a better life, a life with a partner who meets her needs more consistently. But she keeps choosing Homer. And the reason the show suggests is not that Marge is weak or codependent or lacking in self-respect. It's that Homer, for all his faults, makes her happy in ways that more competent men might not. Homer makes Marge laugh. He surprises her. He keeps life interesting. He reminds her that not everything has to be controlled and planned and organized to within an inch of its life. He brings spontaneity and chaos and joy into a life that might otherwise become rigid and joyless. He's terrible at the boring, responsible parts of being a husband, the bill paying and the home maintenance and the showing up on time. but he's wonderful at the parts that can't be taught or learned or practiced. The making her feel loved part, the making her feel desired part, the making her feel like life is an adventure rather than a checklist. This too has philosophical resonance. The Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard, who is often considered the first existentialist, wrote extensively about the nature of commitment. He argued that the deepest form of human existence, what he called the religious stage, required a leap of faith. Not necessarily a leap of faith in God, though Kierkegaard was a Christian, but a leap of faith in something, a commitment that goes beyond what rational calculation can justify, a decision to dedicate yourself to something or someone even though you can't prove it will work out. Marge's continued commitment to Homer is a leap of faith. She can't prove it will work out. The evidence, in fact, suggests it probably won't, given how many times Homer has nearly destroyed everything. But she leaps anyway. She chooses Homer anyway. And this choice, this daily, repeated, exhausting leap of faith is what keeps the Simpson family together. Homer's relationship with Bart is another dimension of his family philosophy. Bart is the troublemaker, the rebel, the kid who defines himself through opposition to authority. Homer's parenting of Bart is, by any conventional standard, terrible. He strangles Bart, he neglects Bart, he forgets about Bart. He sets a terrible example for Bart in every conceivable way. But Homer also loves Bart, and Homer also sees Bart in a way that other authority figures in Bart's life don't. Most of the adults in Bart's life, his teachers, his principal, the police, treat Bart as a problem to be solved. A delinquent to be disciplined, a bad kid who needs to be corrected or contained. Homer doesn't see Bart this way. Homer sees Bart as his son. Full stop. Not his problem son, not his troublemaker son, just his son. And this unconditional acceptance, clumsy and inconsistent as it is, gives Bart something that no amount of discipline or correction can provide. It gives him the knowledge that he is loved regardless of his behavior, that he belongs regardless of his failures, that he is a Simpson, and that being a Simpson means you're part of something even when you're at your worst. In an episode from a later season, Homer takes Bart to work with him, showing him the good parts of his job. Bart is genuinely impressed and tells Homer he wants to grow up to be just like him, a nuclear safety inspector. This is a beautiful moment because it shows Bart seeing Homer not as the embarrassment that the world sees, but as someone worth admiring. Bart, the rebel, the cynic, the kid who mocks everything, looks at his father and sees someone he wants to be. And Homer, who is usually so desperate for approval and validation, receives this gift from his son and doesn't even realize how valuable it is. Homer's relationship with Maggie is the simplest and perhaps the most profound of all his family relationships. Maggie is a baby. She doesn't talk, with very rare exceptions. She communicates through gestures and actions and the rhythmic sucking of her pacifier. And Homer's love for Maggie, expressed through the "do it for her" plaque and through countless small moments throughout the series, is the purest expression of his capacity for love. Because Maggie asks nothing of Homer intellectually. She doesn't need him to understand her homework or discuss philosophy or engage with complex moral dilemmas. She just needs him to be there, to hold her, to love her. And this, the simplest possible version of love, is the thing Homer does best. There's a philosophical concept here that's worth naming. It's called unconditional positive regard. The psychologist Carl Rogers introduced this term to describe the kind of acceptance that he believed was essential for psychological health. Unconditional positive regard means accepting someone fully, without conditions or requirements, without needing them to be or do anything specific. You don't love them because they're smart or successful or well-behaved. You love them because they exist, because they're them. Homer's love for his family at its best approaches unconditional positive regard. Not always, because Homer can be selfish and neglectful and destructive, but at his best, Homer loves his family simply because they're his family. He doesn't need them to earn his love. He doesn't need them to be anything other than what they are. He loves Bart even when Bart is in trouble. He loves Lisa even when she's correcting him. He loves Marge even when she's angry with him. He loves Maggie even though she's never said a word to him. This love isn't perfect. It's not always expressed well or acted on consistently, but it's real. And it's there, and it might be the most genuinely philosophical thing about Homer Simpson. Because the question of whether unconditional love is possible, and whether it's a good thing or a dangerous thing, is one of the central questions of ethics and psychology. Some philosophers argue that unconditional love is naive, that it enables bad behavior, that it removes the incentive for people to improve. If you're loved no matter what you do, why bother being good? Others argue that unconditional love is the foundation of all healthy relationships, that people need to feel accepted before they can grow, that the security of being loved without conditions is what gives people the courage to take risks and face challenges. Homer doesn't know he's participating in this debate. He's just being Homer. But his existence, his way of loving, his stubborn refusal to stop caring about the people in his life, even when they give him every reason to stop, is a data point in the argument. It's evidence that unconditional love, messy and imperfect as it might be, can hold a family together across decades and through disasters that would tear apart families with more sophisticated but more conditional bonds. Let's move into something a little different now, something that connects to the spiritual side of Homer's existence, which is a sentence I never expected to say about a man who once described his religious philosophy as, "I'm not a bad guy. I work hard and I love my kids. So why should I spend half my Sunday hearing about how I'm going to hell?" Homer's relationship with religion and spirituality is one of the most surprisingly nuanced things about his character, and it opens up a whole dimension of philosophical questioning that we haven't explored yet tonight. Because while we've been talking about Homer in relation to Greek philosophers and existentialists and utilitarian thinkers, there's another tradition, the tradition of faith and spiritual seeking, that Homer bumps up against in fascinating ways. The episode Homer the Heretic from season 4 is the most explicit exploration of Homer's spiritual life, and it's worth going through carefully. The episode opens on a bitterly cold Sunday morning. Homer doesn't want to go to church. He tells Marge he's staying home, and Marge, upset but unable to force a grown man out of bed, takes the kids without him. What follows is one of the most joyful sequences in the show's history. Homer stays home alone. He makes himself a special waffle, a moon-shaped waffle that's extra thick with caramelized butter and wrapped around a stick of butter. He dances in his underwear. He cranks up the heat. He watches football. He finds a penny. Everything goes perfectly. Homer has the best morning of his life, all because he skipped church. Meanwhile, Marge and the kids are trapped in a freezing church with a broken heater, listening to a sermon that goes on forever, and when they finally get out, their car won't start. The contrast is deliberate and pointed. Homer, the sinner who skipped church, has a wonderful time. Marge and the kids, the dutiful churchgoers, suffer. The universe seems to be rewarding Homer's rebellion and punishing Marge's obedience. Homer takes this as a sign. He decides he's done with church permanently. He's going to start his own religion, a religion of one, based on the principle that God wants him to be happy and that he's happier at home in his underwear than sitting in a pew. Marge is horrified. She enlists Reverend Lovejoy and Ned Flanders to try to bring Homer back to the fold. They visit Homer, and he tells them directly that he's not coming back. He says he's found his own way of connecting with God, and it involves staying home on Sundays. Lovejoy and Flanders are appalled, but can't really argue with Homer's sincere belief that he's doing what's right for himself. Then something happens that complicates everything. Homer falls asleep with a cigar burning, and his house catches fire. He's trapped inside, unconscious, while the house burns around him. And who saves him? Ned Flanders. The most devout Christian in Springfield rushes into the burning building and pulls Homer to safety. Then the volunteer fire department shows up, a diverse group including Krusty the Clown, an agnostic, and Apu Nahasa Pima Pedalon, a Hindu, all working together to save Homer's home. The message is clear, even if the show delivers it with characteristic lightness. God, if God exists, works through other people, through community, through the bonds of friendship and neighborliness that transcend individual religious beliefs. The episode ends with Homer going back to church, but reluctantly and with a caveat. He tells God in a dream sequence that he still has questions and complaints about organized religion. And God, voiced with gentle amusement by a divine figure whose face we never see, tells Homer that he respects Homer's questions. He even confides in Homer the meaning of life. But the episode cuts to credits before we can hear what it is. This is the show at its most philosophically playful. It gives us the ultimate answer and then takes it away, leaving us, like Homer, with questions that don't have tidy resolutions. What makes this episode philosophically significant is that it takes Homer's spiritual questioning seriously. Homer isn't rejecting God because he's an atheist or because he's had a crisis of faith. He's questioning organized religion because his lived experience tells him that church makes him unhappy and staying home makes him happy. This is a practical, experiential objection to religious practice, and it's actually a philosophically respectable one. The pragmatist philosopher William James, who wrote The Varieties of Religious Experience in 1902, argued that religious beliefs should be evaluated partly by their fruits, by the effects they have on the believer's life. If a belief makes someone a better, happier, more functional person, that's evidence in its favor. If a belief makes someone miserable and dysfunctional, that's evidence against it. By James' standard, Homer's objection to church attendance has merit. Church makes him unhappy. Staying home makes him happy. The fruits of church-going, for Homer specifically, are negative. But the episode also shows the limits of Homer's approach. When his house catches fire, it's the church community, the very community he rejected, that saves him. His individual happiness, his Sunday morning waffles and football couldn't protect him from disaster. He needed other people. He needed the bonds of community that institutions like churches, whatever their other flaws, help maintain. This tension between individual happiness and communal belonging runs throughout The Simpsons, and it's one of the show's deepest philosophical preoccupations. Homer is an individualist. He wants to do what he wants, when he wants, without anyone telling him he has to sit in a pew or say a prayer or conform to rules that don't make sense to him. But Homer is also deeply dependent on his community. He needs Moe's Tavern. He needs the guys at work. He needs his neighbors, especially Ned Flanders, who Homer mocks relentlessly but who always shows up when Homer needs help. The philosopher Alistair MacIntyre has argued that virtue cannot exist outside of community. You can't be virtuous in a vacuum. Virtues are practices that only make sense within a social context, within a tradition, within a community that shares certain values and goals. By this standard, Homer's individualism, his desire to be a religion of one, is doomed to fail. Not because God requires church attendance, but because human beings require community, and community requires shared practices and commitments that sometimes conflict with individual preference. Homer eventually goes back to church, not because he's been convinced by theological argument, but because he's been shown through the fire and the rescue that he needs the people who go to church even if he doesn't need the church itself. This is a subtle and mature resolution. The show doesn't say Homer was wrong to question organized religion. It doesn't say church attendance is essential for salvation or morality. It says that community matters and that the forms and institutions through which community is maintained, imperfect as they are, serve a purpose that individual happiness alone can't fulfill. Homer's spiritual life extends beyond this single episode, of course. Throughout the series, Homer has spoken to God directly on multiple occasions, usually in dream sequences or fantasy segments. And in these conversations, God is always patient with Homer. God listens to Homer's complaints and questions. God doesn't punish Homer for his doubts or his absences from church. God treats Homer the way a good parent treats a child who's testing boundaries, with amused patience and unconditional acceptance. There's something deeply comforting about this portrayal, especially for viewers who have complicated relationships with organized religion. The show suggests that whatever God is, if God exists, God isn't keeping score. God isn't waiting to punish you for sleeping in on Sunday. God understands that you're doing your best, even when your best looks like Homer Simpson eating moon waffles in his underwear. This is a theological position, informal and comedic though it may be, and it aligns with certain liberal theological traditions that emphasize God's compassion and patience over God's judgment and wrath. Homer's spirituality also connects to his broader philosophical character in an important way. Homer doesn't need God to give his life meaning. He doesn't need religion to tell him what's right and wrong. He doesn't need a church to make him feel part of something larger than himself. He has all of these things already through his family, his friends, his simple pleasures, his instinctive love for the people in his life. Religion, for Homer, is not the foundation of his world. It's more like decoration. Nice to have, not strictly necessary. The foundation is something more basic. The foundation is just being alive and finding that being alive is good. This puts Homer in an interesting position relative to one of the biggest philosophical debates of the last several centuries, the debate about whether morality requires God. Many philosophers and theologians have argued that without God, there's no basis for morality. If there's no divine lawgiver, then moral rules are just human inventions with no binding authority. This position is sometimes called the divine command theory of ethics, and it's been defended by serious thinkers for hundreds of years. Homer's existence is a quiet argument against this position. Homer is not particularly religious. He goes to church irregularly and under protest. He doesn't know or care about theological doctrines. He's never read the Bible cover to cover. He couldn't explain the 10 Commandments if you asked him. And yet, Homer has a functioning moral compass. It's not a sophisticated moral compass. It doesn't always point true north, but it's there. Homer loves his family and tries in his clumsy way to take care of them. He feels guilty when he does something wrong, even if he doesn't always understand why it's wrong. He helps people when he sees them in trouble. He risks his life for others. He's capable of selflessness and sacrifice, even if these moments are outnumbered by his moments of selfishness and laziness. Homer's morality doesn't come from God or from philosophical reasoning or from any deliberate ethical framework. It comes from somewhere deeper and more basic. It comes from his nature as a social animal, from his instinctive bonds with the people he loves, from his empathy, limited but real, for the people around him. It comes from being human. And this suggests that morality might be more fundamental than theology, that the capacity for care and compassion and love might be built into our biology rather than imposed from above by a divine authority. This is a position that many secular philosophers have defended, from David Hume to Charles Darwin to contemporary thinkers like Frans de Waal, who studies morality in primates. Morality, these thinkers argue, evolved. It's part of our biology. We didn't need God to tell us to take care of our children or to cooperate with our neighbors or to feel bad when we hurt someone. These behaviors and feelings emerge through millions of years of social evolution. They're as natural to us as breathing. Homer embodies this view without knowing it. His morality is instinctive, not learned. It's emotional, not rational. It comes from his gut, not from a book. And while his gut-level morality is far from perfect, it's enough to hold a family together, maintain friendships, and generally function as a member of a community. It's enough to live a recognizably moral life, even if it's not the kind of moral life that would impress a philosophy professor. If you're still listening, and if these ideas are starting to blur pleasantly around the edges as sleep approaches, that's exactly as it should be. These are the kinds of questions that don't need sharp answers. They're questions to drift through, not questions to solve. Let's talk about something that connects everything we've explored so far. Homer's relationship with knowledge and truth. Because we've touched on this from several angles already, through the Hawemar episode, through Frank Grimes, through Homer's ignorance of the world's problems, but there's a deeper pattern here that's worth drawing out. Homer's entire existence is an argument about the nature and value of truth. And it's an argument that cuts against some of our deepest cultural assumptions. Western civilization, since at least the ancient Greeks, has been built on the idea that truth is good. Knowledge is good. Understanding is good. The pursuit of truth is one of the highest human activities, and the more truth you have, the better off you are. This assumption runs through everything, from Socrates' insistence that the unexamined life is not worth living, to the scientific revolution's faith in empirical investigation, to the modern university system's commitment to research and discovery. Truth is good. More truth is better. This is so deeply embedded in our culture that it barely registers as an assumption. It just seems obvious. Homer challenges this assumption, not deliberately, not consciously, but through the simple fact of his existence. Homer doesn't pursue truth. He doesn't value knowledge. He doesn't examine his life or seek understanding or care about being right. And he's happy. He's one of the happiest characters in fiction. He's happier than most real people. He's happier than most philosophers who spend their lives pursuing the truth that's supposed to make life better. Now, you could argue that Homer's happiness is shallow, that it's the happiness of ignorance, And that real happiness, deep happiness, meaningful happiness, requires the kind of understanding that Homer lacks. Mill would argue this. Socrates would argue this. Most of the Western philosophical tradition would argue this. But the show keeps providing evidence that this argument is wrong, or at least that it's not as straightforwardly right as it seems. The H. Homer episode shows us that intelligence made Homer miserable. The Frank Grimes episode shows us that seeing reality clearly can be fatal. Lisa's character shows us that intelligence and moral seriousness produce loneliness and sadness alongside their undeniable benefits. The show isn't anti-intellectual. It doesn't argue that ignorance is always better than knowledge. Lisa is portrayed sympathetically. Her intelligence is a gift as well as a burden. Her moral seriousness is admirable even when it's isolating. The show values knowledge and truth, but it also recognizes through Homer that knowledge and truth have costs, that some forms of understanding are genuinely harmful to the person who possesses them, that the pursuit of truth taken far enough can lead to despair. There's a concept in philosophy called the paradox of hedonism. The paradox says that the more directly you pursue happiness, the less likely you are to find it. Happiness, the paradox suggests, is a byproduct of other activities. It comes when you're engaged in meaningful work, or lost in a conversation with a friend, or absorbed in a creative project, or playing with your children. It doesn't come when you sit down and deliberately try to be happy. The pursuit of happiness defeats itself. Homer illustrates the opposite of this paradox. Homer doesn't pursue happiness. He doesn't think about happiness. He doesn't set happiness as a goal and then try to figure out how to achieve it. He just lives, and happiness happens to him as a natural consequence of living in the way that comes naturally to him. He eats because he's hungry and the eating makes him happy. He drinks because he likes the taste and the drinking makes him happy. He sits on the couch because he's tired and the sitting makes him happy. He hugs Marge because he loves her and the hugging makes him happy. There's no strategy here, no optimization, no self-help routine to follow. Just a man living his life and finding it good. There might be a real lesson in this, even for people who are much smarter than Homer. The lesson isn't to stop thinking or to stop caring about truth or to put a crayon in your brain. The lesson is that happiness, when it comes, often comes through simple, unplanned, unanalyzed moments of genuine engagement with life. The donut you eat without thinking about your diet. The conversation you have without worrying about whether you're saying the right thing. The sunset you watch without trying to photograph it for social media. The hug you give without calculating its emotional impact. Homer's genius, if we can call it that, is his ability to be fully present in these moments without the interference of self-consciousness. Most people can't do this. Most people are too busy monitoring themselves, evaluating their experiences, comparing their lives to others' lives, worrying about whether they're happy enough or successful enough or productive enough. This self-monitoring, this constant evaluation actually interferes with happiness. It puts a pane of glass between you and your experience. You're not just eating the donut. You're eating the donut and simultaneously assessing whether eating the donut is making you as happy as you think it should. This meta-level awareness, this thinking about happiness is exhausting and counterproductive. Homer doesn't have this problem. Homer doesn't monitor himself. Homer doesn't evaluate his experiences against some ideal. Homer just experiences, and the directness of his experience, the absence of that mediating layer of self-consciousness, might be what allows him to find happiness in things that wouldn't satisfy more reflective people. The philosopher Martin Heidegger talked about something he called thrownness, the condition of being dropped into existence without choosing it, without understanding it, without having any say in the matter. We're all thrown into the world. We didn't choose our bodies, our families, our historical moment, our language, our culture. We just arrived, and we have to make the best of whatever we find ourselves in. Homer is the ultimate example of thrownness accepted. He didn't choose to be Homer Simpson. He didn't choose to be dumb or fat or bald or employed at a nuclear power plant. He didn't choose Springfield or Marge or Bart or Lisa or Maggie. He was just thrown into all of it. And his response to being thrown is not to resist or to struggle or to demand a different life. His response is to say, okay, and eat a donut. This acceptance, while it looks like passivity and might even be passivity, is also a form of peace, a form of being at home in the world. a form of belonging that more ambitious, more striving, more self-aware people often can't achieve because they're too busy wishing they were somewhere else, someone else, living some other life. Heidegger would also appreciate Homer's relationship with death, or rather, his non-relationship with death. Heidegger believed that an authentic life required confronting your own mortality. Being toward death, he called it. Acknowledging that you're going to die, really taking it in, not just as an abstract fact, but as a personal reality that shapes everything. For Heidegger, most people live in denial of death. They distract themselves, they look away, they pretend it's not coming. And this denial makes their lives inauthentic because they're avoiding the most fundamental fact of their existence. Homer doesn't confront death in the way Heidegger recommends, but Homer also doesn't deny death the way most people do. Homer's relationship with death is more like total indifference. Death doesn't scare him because death doesn't really register for him. He's been close to death so many times that it's lost any meaning it might once have had. He's not bravely facing his mortality. He's just not thinking about it. And while this isn't Heidegger's vision of authenticity, it produces a similar result. Homer lives without the anxiety that comes from knowing you're going to die. He lives without the desperate clinging to life that makes so many people miserable. He's free in a way that Heidegger would recognize, even if Heidegger would argue that Homer's freedom comes from ignorance rather than from genuine confrontation with finitude. The night is deepening, and these ideas are getting softer and more reflective, which feels right. We're not trying to prove anything here. We're just thinking, just exploring, just letting Homer and his strange, simple, profound existence wash over us like warm water. There's a question that's been running underneath everything we've talked about tonight. We've approached it from different directions, circled around it, touched it, and pulled back. But now, as we move toward the deeper, quieter part of the night, let's face it directly. Is Homer Simpson's happiness real? This isn't a trick question, and there isn't a trick answer. It's a genuine philosophical problem, and the show, across more than 3 decades, has never resolved it. That's one of the things that makes The Simpsons such an extraordinary piece of art. It has the courage to raise questions that it knows it can't answer. Let's lay out both sides carefully because they both have genuine weight, and because the tension between them is what gives Homer his philosophical depth. The case that Homer's happiness is real goes something like this. Happiness is a subjective experience. It's something you feel. It's not something that can be measured from the outside or validated by anyone other than the person experiencing it. If Homer feels happy, then Homer's happy. Full stop. You don't get to tell someone that their happiness doesn't count because it doesn't meet your criteria for what happiness should look like. That's paternalistic and dismissive. It's the kind of thinking that leads to people judging others for finding joy in simple things, in junk food and television and bowling with friends, as though there's something lesser about those pleasures compared to the pleasures of opera or philosophy or fine wine. Homer's happiness is real because Homer experiences it as real. His joy when he eats a donut is genuine joy. His love for his family is genuine love. His contentment on the couch is genuine contentment. These experiences are not diminished by the fact that Homer doesn't understand quantum physics or appreciate Renaissance art. Furthermore, Homer's happiness has survived tests that would destroy more sophisticated forms of contentment. He's lost his job, his savings, his health, his home, and his dignity more times than anyone can count. And every time his happiness returns, it bounces back. It reasserts itself. If Homer's happiness were fragile, if it were built on a shallow foundation, it would have shattered long ago under the accumulated weight of his disasters. The fact that it keeps surviving suggests that it's rooted in something deep and genuine, something more durable than mere ignorance, something structural, something that goes all the way down to the bedrock of who Homer is. And there's the HOMR episode, which we keep coming back to because it's the show's most direct engagement with this question. Homer experienced intelligence. He tasted the higher pleasures that Mill prizes so highly. He connected with Lisa on an intellectual level. He saw the world clearly, and then he chose to give it all back. He chose happiness over understanding. And he made this choice while he was still smart, while he was still capable of weighing both options with a clear mind. This isn't the choice of a man whose happiness is shallow or false. This is the choice of a man who has looked at both kinds of life, the life of the mind and the life of the belly, and has decided, with full knowledge of what he's sacrificing, that his happiness is worth preserving. You can disagree with his choice, but you can't call it uninformed. Now, let's look at the other side. The case that Homer's happiness is an illusion, or at least that it's incomplete and ultimately insufficient, goes like this. Homer's happiness depends on ignorance. He's happy because he doesn't know what he doesn't know. He doesn't worry about the dangers of his workplace because he can't understand them. He doesn't feel the full weight of his alienation from Lisa because he can't perceive the depth of the gap between them. He doesn't suffer from existential dread because he can't comprehend the existential situation. His happiness is real in the sense that he experiences it, yes, but it's happiness built on a foundation of not seeing. It's the happiness of a man in a burning room who doesn't smell the smoke. Mill would say that Homer's happiness is the happiness of the pig, and that no amount of pig happiness can equal even a small amount of Socratic understanding. The pig rolling in mud is genuinely experiencing pleasure. Nobody denies that. But the pig's pleasure is lower, less valuable, less worthy of respect than the philosopher's anguished search for truth. Better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a pig satisfied, because Socrates' dissatisfaction contains something, awareness, understanding, depth, that the pig's satisfaction lacks entirely. And there's something to this argument that's hard to dismiss. Homer's happiness has real costs that Homer himself can't see, but that the viewer can. His ignorance puts his family at risk. His inability to learn from mistakes means he'll keep making the same dangerous errors forever. His emotional simplicity means he can't fully meet the needs of the people who love him most, especially Lisa, who needs intellectual connection that Homer can't provide. Homer's happiness is real, but it's purchased at a price that other people pay. Marge pays it in exhaustion and worry. Lisa pays it in loneliness and frustrated love. Bart pays it in a father who can't guide him through the complexities of growing up. Maggie pays it in ways the show hasn't fully explored, because Maggie is still a baby, still in the stage of life where Homer's simple, physical love is enough. But someday Maggie will grow up, and someday she'll need more from her father than he can give. There's also the question of what Homer's happiness means in the context of the broader world. Homer is happy, but the world around him is not. Springfield is a mess. The nuclear power plant is a disaster waiting to happen. The political system is corrupt. The environment is being destroyed. The social fabric is fraying. Homer doesn't notice any of this, and his failure to notice is part of why these problems persist. If everyone were Homer, if everyone chose donuts over awareness and contentment over engagement, the world would fall apart. Homer's happiness only works because other people like Lisa, people who see the problems and try to fix them, are carrying the burden that Homer's ignorance allows him to avoid. This is a serious moral objection. Homer's happiness isn't just a personal choice. It has consequences for others. His ignorance isn't just his own business. It contributes to a world in which problems go unsolved and injustices go unchallenged because the people who could do something about them are too comfortable and too unaware to bother. And yet the show refuses to resolve this tension. It doesn't come down on one side or the other. It doesn't say Homer's right and Lisa is wrong. It doesn't say Lisa is right and Homer is wrong. It holds both truths simultaneously, like a pair of hands cupping water. Homer's happiness is real and it comes at a cost. Lisa's awareness is valuable and it causes pain. The fool's contentment and the wise person's suffering are both genuine, both important, both worth taking seriously. This is philosophically honest in a way that most media isn't. Most stories want to give you an answer. Most narratives want to tell you which character is right and which is wrong. The Simpsons, at its best, resists this impulse. It shows you the complexity of the question and trusts you to sit with it. It doesn't preach. It doesn't moralize. It just presents Homer in all his foolish, happy, problematic glory and lets you make of him what you will. The HOMR episode haunts because it forces the viewer to ask what they would choose. If you could take a pill that would make you smarter but sadder, or a pill that would make you dumber but happier, which would you take? Most people, if they're being honest, aren't sure. The philosophical tradition says you should choose knowledge. Socrates, Mill, Aristotle, the entire weight of Western thought says, understanding is better than ignorance, even when understanding hurts. But Homer's graph, Lisa's graph, the one showing intelligence going up and happiness going down, whispers a different possibility. Maybe the tradition is wrong. Maybe, for some people, in some circumstances, the fool's path is the kinder one. And maybe the question itself is too simple. Maybe it's not really a choice between knowledge and happiness, because those two things interact in ways that can't be captured by a simple either-or. Some knowledge increases happiness. The knowledge that you're loved. The knowledge that your work matters. The knowledge that spring always follows winter. And some ignorance causes suffering. The ignorance that leads to preventable mistakes. The ignorance that leaves you vulnerable to manipulation. The ignorance that keeps you from seeing danger until it's too late. Homer's story suggests that the relationship between knowledge and happiness is not a straight line going in one direction. It's a complicated, messy, tangled web of connections where more knowledge sometimes helps and sometimes hurts, where more awareness sometimes liberates and sometimes imprisons, where the same truth can be poison for one person and medicine for another. Homer's specific kind of ignorance, his particular cocktail of not knowing, happens to produce happiness. Lisa's specific kind of knowledge, her particular cocktail of understanding, happens to produce loneliness and sadness alongside its genuine rewards. Neither of them represents the universal human condition. They represent two possible ways of navigating the same confusing world. The show's refusal to choose between them is its deepest philosophical statement. Life is not a problem with a solution. It's a predicament with no right answer. You make your choices and you live with them and you hope for the best. Homer's choice is the donut and the couch and the happy ignorance. Lisa's choice is the saxophone and the books and the painful awareness. Both choices are valid. Both choices cost something. And neither choice guarantees that the person making it will find what they're looking for. As you lie there, maybe drifting now between waking and sleeping, this is a question you don't need to answer. You don't need to decide whether Homer is right or Lisa is right. You don't need to resolve the tension between knowledge and happiness. You can just hold the question gently, the way you'd hold a sleeping child, and let it rest. Because that's what philosophy is at its best, not answers. Questions. Good questions that you can carry with you through your life, that change shape as you change. That means something different when you're 20, than when you're 40, than when you're 60. The question of whether it's better to know and suffer or not know and be happy is that kind of question. It will be with you for as long as you live, and it will never fully resolve, and that's okay. The question itself is the gift. The asking is the point. Homer doesn't ask the question, of course. Homer doesn't even know there's a question to ask. But his existence asks it for him, louder and more clearly than any philosopher's argument ever could. Every time Homer smiles, every time he says, at a donut, or woo-hoo at a stroke of luck, or dough at his own stupidity, the question echoes through the show like a bell being struck in a cathedral. Is this enough? Is happiness enough? Is love enough? Is a simple life lived with genuine pleasure enough to count as a life well lived? The cathedral doesn't answer. The bell just rings. Let's stay in this quiet space for a while and think about something that connects all of these philosophical threads. Homer's relationship with time. Because Homer doesn't just live differently from other characters in how he thinks or what he knows. He lives differently in how he experiences time itself. And this difference, which might seem trivial, actually connects to some of the deepest ideas in philosophy and psychology about what makes a good life. Most people live in what psychologists call temporal orientation. They're oriented toward the past, the present, or the future, or some combination of all three. Past-oriented people spend a lot of time thinking about what has already happened, remembering, regretting, savoring, learning from their experiences. Future-oriented people spend a lot of time thinking about what might happen, planning, worrying, hoping, setting goals. Present-oriented people spend most of their time engaged with what is happening right now, without much thought for yesterday or tomorrow. Each of these orientations has advantages and disadvantages. Past orientation helps you learn from experience but can trap you in regret. Future orientation helps you plan and prepare but can drown you in anxiety. Present orientation helps you enjoy life but can leave you unprepared for what's coming. Homer is almost entirely present-oriented. He doesn't think about the past because he can barely remember it. He doesn't think about the future because he can barely imagine it. He lives in the now with an intensity that is sometimes destructive and sometimes beautiful, and always, always complete. When Homer sits on the couch, he's on the couch. He's not thinking about the meeting he has tomorrow or the argument he had with Marge last week. He's not planning his weekend or reviewing his performance at work. He's just sitting, just being, just existing in the moment with no narrative about the past pulling him backward and no worry about the future pulling him forward. The philosopher and psychologist William James, brother of the novelist Henry James, wrote about what he called the stream of consciousness. He described human experience as a river of thoughts, feelings, and perceptions flowing continuously from one moment to the next. For most people, this stream is turbulent. It's full of eddies and currents and rapids. Thoughts about the past interrupt thoughts about the present. Worries about the future intrude on enjoyment of the moment. The stream is rarely calm. Homer's stream of consciousness, if we can even call it that, is more like a lazy river at a water park. Slow, warm, circular, and mostly concerned with whatever is immediately in front of it. A donut, a television show, a conversation with Barney. The stream doesn't rush. It doesn't churn. It doesn't split into multiple channels of competing concerns. It just flows gently and continuously from one simple experience to the next. This present orientation connects to a concept that's become increasingly important in modern psychology and philosophy, the concept of flow. Flow was identified and named by the psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, and it describes a state of complete absorption in an activity. When you're in flow, you lose track of time. You forget about your problems. You become one with whatever you're doing. Flow is associated with happiness, creativity, and peak performance. It's the state that athletes call the zone and musicians call being in the groove. Flow usually requires a match between the difficulty of the task and the skill of the person performing it. If the task is too easy, you get bored. If it's too hard, you get anxious. Flow happens in the sweet spot where the challenge perfectly matches your ability. Homer experiences something like flow with remarkable frequency, but for a peculiar reason. Because his skill level is so low for most tasks, even simple activities present just enough challenge to absorb him fully. Making a sandwich requires his full attention. Watching television requires his full engagement. Bowling with his friends is a genuine test of his abilities. Things that would be mindlessly easy for a more capable person are, for Homer, just difficult enough to produce absorption. He's in flow more often than most people because most of life falls into his sweet spot of difficulty. This is another way in which Homer's simplicity produces a result that more complex people struggle to achieve. Flow, that coveted state of absorption and happiness, is easier for Homer to reach because his threshold is lower. Where a neurosurgeon might need the challenge of a complex operation to achieve flow, Homer can achieve it with a bag of chips and a remote control. This isn't a superior form of flow. Nobody would argue that Homer's couch flow is equivalent to a surgeon's operating room flow, but it's real flow nonetheless, and it produces real happiness, and Homer has access to it almost any time he wants. The Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh wrote extensively about the practice of mindfulness, which he described as paying full attention to whatever you're doing in the present moment. Washing the dishes mindfully, walking mindfully, eating mindfully. The point isn't that washing dishes is inherently enlightening. The point is that any activity, no matter how mundane, can become a vehicle for awareness and peace if you bring your full attention to it. Most people find this incredibly difficult. Their minds wander. Their attention splits. They wash the dishes while thinking about work, while worrying about their health, while replaying a conversation from 3 days ago. Homer washes the dishes while washing the dishes. Or more accurately, Homer avoids washing the dishes while fully committing to avoiding washing the dishes. Whatever Homer is doing, he's doing it completely. He's not split. He's not divided. He's not half present and half somewhere else. He's all here all the time because he doesn't have the mental bandwidth to be anywhere else. Thich Nhat Hanh would have found Homer a fascinating case study, a man who practices perfect mindfulness without any awareness that he's doing it. A man who lives in the present moment not through decades of meditation practice, but through the simple fact that his mind can't sustain the kind of time traveling that takes most people out of the present. Homer's mindfulness is accidental, involuntary, and philosophically interesting, precisely because it raises the question of whether the source of a state matters as much as the state itself. If two people are equally present in the current moment, and one of them achieved that presence through 20 years of meditation practice and the other achieved it through being Homer Simpson, is the quality of their presence different? Does the path to mindfulness change the value of the mindfulness itself? A strict utilitarian would say no. If the result is the same, the path doesn't matter. A virtue ethicist like Aristotle might say yes. The practiced mindfulness of the meditator is a genuine achievement, a cultivated virtue, while Homer's mindfulness is just an accident of neurology. The meditator deserves credit for their presence. Homer just stumbled into it. But from the inside, from the perspective of the person experiencing the present moment, the difference might not matter at all. The donut tastes the same whether you're eating it mindfully by choice or mindfully by limitation. The sunset is just as beautiful whether you're watching it with the hard-won attention of a Zen master or the natural attention of a man who can't think of anything else to think about. The moment is the moment is the moment. And Homer's moments are, from his perspective, very good. If you're still with us, that's lovely. And if you're fading in and out, riding the gentle waves between awake and asleep, that's perfect too. There's no wrong way to be here. You can let these ideas drift over you like clouds. You don't need to catch them. You don't need to hold them. Just let them pass. Before we begin to wind down, there's one more thing worth exploring. Something that connects Homer not just to philosophy, but to the broader question of what it means to be a character in a story. What it means to be fictional. Because Homer's existence raises a question that goes beyond any specific philosophical framework. It asks what we owe the characters who keep us company in the dark. Homer Simpson has been with us since 1989. That's over 36 years. He's been on our screens, in our living rooms, in our conversations, in our cultural vocabulary, for longer than many of us have been alive. He's been with us through recessions and wars and pandemics and technological revolutions. He's been with us while we grew up, got jobs, fell in love, had children, lost parents, changed and grew and aged in all the ways that Homer himself never does. The show has been renewed through season 40. Over 770 episodes have aired. Doe is in the Oxford English Dictionary. The Simpsons has been called the greatest television show ever made by numerous publications and critics. Over 1 billion hours of the show have been streamed on Disney+. These numbers are almost incomprehensible. They represent a cultural phenomenon that has no real parallel in the history of entertainment. And at the center of all of it is Homer. Not the smartest character, not the most complex, not the most admirable. Just a fat, bald, yellow cartoon man who loves donuts and his family and sleeping on the job. A man who has never changed, never grown, never become more than what he was in the first episode. A man who is, in every measurable way, a failure by the standards that our culture claims to value. And yet he endures. He persists. He keeps showing up week after week, year after year, decade after decade. And we keep watching. We keep caring. We keep finding something in Homer that we recognize, something that speaks to us, something that makes us feel less alone in our own confused, imperfect, donut-eating lives. Maybe that's the deepest philosophical lesson Homer has to offer. Not any specific insight about happiness or knowledge or truth or virtue. Just the simple, stubborn fact of his continued existence. The fact that he keeps going. The fact that no matter how many times the boulder rolls back down the hill, Homer picks it up and starts pushing again. Not because he's brave, not because he's wise, not because he's making a philosophical statement, but because it's what he does. It's who he is. And tomorrow there will be another donut and another day on the couch and another chance to hug Marge and yell at Bart and not understand Lisa and love Maggie. And that's enough. It's enough. There's something worth pausing on here before we move to the end of our time together. Something about what it means that we've spent this long thinking about a cartoon character. Because the fact that Homer Simpson can sustain this kind of philosophical attention, the fact that a man made of yellow ink and voice acting can make us think seriously about Aristotle and Camus and the nature of happiness, tells us something important about the role that fiction plays in human life. Philosophers have their thought experiments. They have the trolley problem, where you decide whether to pull a lever and divert a train to save 5 people but kill 1. They have the experience machine, where Robert Nozick asked whether you plug into a machine that gives you any experience you want, perfectly simulated, if it meant leaving reality behind forever. They have Plato's cave, where prisoners mistake shadows on the wall for reality because they've never seen the sun. These thought experiments are tools for thinking. They create simplified scenarios that isolate specific philosophical questions and let you examine them without the noise of real life getting in the way. Homer Simpson is a thought experiment that got out of the lab. He started as a joke, a satirical portrait of the American working-class father. And over 3.5 decades, he evolved into something that no philosopher could have designed on purpose. He became a living illustration of questions that philosophers have been asking with abstract arguments for millennia. The difference between Homer and a thought experiment is that Homer has texture. He has history. He has relationships and habits and catchphrases and a favorite bar and a spot on the couch that's worn into the shape of his body. He's not a stick figure in a logic puzzle. He's a person or something so close to a person that the distinction doesn't matter much when you're lying in bed at 2 a.m. thinking about the meaning of life. The philosopher Martha Nussbaum has argued that literature is a form of moral philosophy, that reading novels and watching plays and engaging with fictional characters is not just entertainment, but a way of expanding your moral imagination. When you spend time with a fictional character, you practice empathy. You see the world through someone else's eyes. You feel what they feel. You understand from the inside what it's like to be someone other than yourself. This kind of understanding, Nussbaum argues, is essential to moral life. You can't be a good person if you can't imagine what it's like to be other people. And fiction is one of the most powerful tools we have for developing that imagination. By this standard, Homer is a moral education. Not because he teaches you how to be good, because Homer is objectively not very good at being good, but because he forces you to take seriously a perspective that you might otherwise dismiss. The perspective of the fool, the perspective of the ignorant, the unsophisticated, the intellectually limited. Most of us, most of the time, look down on people like Homer. We value intelligence. We value awareness. We value sophistication and achievement and the kind of competence that Homer spectacularly lacks. Homer makes us reconsider these values. He makes us ask whether the things we look down on, simplicity, ignorance, contentment with small pleasures, might actually contain something valuable that our more sophisticated worldview misses. This is what great fiction does. It doesn't confirm your existing beliefs. It challenges them. It takes a character you dismiss in real life, a Homer Simpson, a man you wouldn't hire or befriend or respect, and it makes you care about him. It makes you see him. It makes you recognize that his inner life, simple as it is real and valuable and worthy of attention. And in doing that, it changes how you see the real Homers in your life. The people who aren't very smart, the people who don't read books or follow the news or care about the issues you care about. The people who are happy in ways you don't understand and content with lives you'd find stifling. Homer teaches you to look at those people with something other than condescension. He teaches you to wonder whether their happiness might be real, whether their way of living might have something to teach you. Nozick's experience machine is relevant here. Nozick asked whether you'd choose to live in a simulated reality that felt perfect, knowing that it wasn't real. Most people say no. Most people say they want real experiences, even if real experiences are harder and more painful than simulated ones. There's something about authenticity, about actually doing things rather than just experiencing the simulation of doing things, that matters to people. Homer's happiness raises a version of this question. Homer's happiness is real in the sense that he feels it, but it's based on a distorted perception of reality. He's happy partly because he doesn't see the world as it actually is. He's happy because the crayon in his brain filters out the complexity and pain that would make a clearer seeing person miserable. Is Homer's happiness authentic? Or is it a kind of experience machine, a naturally occurring simulation of contentment that depends on not seeing reality? The show doesn't answer this question, and I don't think it should. Because the question, like most of the questions we've explored tonight, might not have a single right answer. It might depend on what you mean by authentic. It might depend on what you think reality is. It might depend on whether you value the feeling of happiness or the conditions under which that feeling arises. These are questions that have kept philosophers busy for centuries and will keep them busy for centuries more. Homer's contribution is not to answer them, but to make them vivid, personal, and impossible to ignore. There's also something worth saying about why Homer endures as a character while so many other fictional creations fade. Think about all the television shows that have come and gone since The Simpsons premiered in 1989. Thousands of shows, tens of thousands of characters, most of them forgotten, most of them lasting a few seasons before the cultural memory moves on. But Homer persists. He's been on our screens continuously for over 36 years. Why? Part of the answer is practical. The Simpsons is a well-made show with great writing and talented voice actors. But lots of well-made shows don't last 36 years. The deeper answer, I think, is that Homer touches something universal, something that transcends the specific cultural moment of late 20th century America, something that connects to a human truth that doesn't go away no matter how much the world changes. That truth is this: we are all to some degree Homer. We all have a Homer inside us, a part of us that wants to stop trying so hard, a part that wants to eat the donut without guilt, sit on the couch without shame, love our families without having to prove we're worthy of them, a part that's tired of the constant pressure to be smarter, more productive, more aware, more responsible, more everything, a part that just wants to be, just wants to exist, just wants to lie in bed and feel the warmth of the blankets and think about nothing at all. This part of us is not our best part. It's not the part that builds cities or writes symphonies or cures diseases or fights for justice. It's the part that most of us try to suppress because we know that if we gave into it entirely, our lives would fall apart. We can't all be Homer. The world needs people who try, who strive, who work, who care about things beyond their immediate comfort. But this part of us is real, and it needs tending. It needs acknowledgement. It needs occasionally to be allowed to sit on the couch and eat a donut and watch television without being told it should be doing something more productive. Homer gives us permission to do this. Homer says, through his existence, that the part of you that wants to rest is not shameful, that the part of you that doesn't want to grow today is not broken, that the part of you that just wants to be comfortable and loved and present is not a failure. You can be Lisa tomorrow. You can be ambitious and smart and morally serious and engaged with the world's problems. You can examine your life and pursue truth and fight for what's right. All of that matters. All of that is important. But tonight, you can be Homer. Tonight, you can let it all go. The ambition, the worry, the self-improvement, the striving, the constant, exhausting effort to be better than you were yesterday. You can set all of that down gently the way you'd set down a heavy bag after a long walk. You can breathe. You can rest. You can be exactly who you are right now, no better and no worse, and that can be enough. Homer would approve. Homer would say, rest. And then he'd close his eyes and be asleep in 30 seconds because Homer doesn't lie awake thinking about all the things he should have done differently. Homer doesn't replay his failures or rehearse tomorrow's worries. Homer just sleeps, deeply, peacefully, completely, the way all of us wish we could sleep, the way all of us can sleep if we give ourselves permission. Consider this your permission. The French philosopher Blaise Pascal once wrote that all of humanity's problems stem from our inability to sit quietly in a room. We are restless creatures. We crave stimulation, achievement, validation, meaning. We can't stand stillness. We can't stand silence. We fill every moment with activity and noise because the alternative, just sitting with ourselves, terrifies us. We're afraid of what we might find if we stop moving long enough to look. Homer can sit quietly in a room. Homer can sit quietly in a room for hours. He can sit on that couch, staring at the television, and feel no restlessness, no anxiety, no gnawing sense that he should be doing something more productive. He is at peace with stillness in a way that Pascal would have found remarkable. not because Homer has conquered restlessness through discipline or meditation, but because restlessness requires a certain complexity of mind that Homer simply doesn't possess. He doesn't feel the pull toward constant activity because he doesn't feel the void that constant activity is designed to fill. Pascal thought the solution to our restlessness was God, that the void at the center of human experience was a God-shaped hole, and that only faith could fill it. Homer suggests a different possibility, that the void might not be there for everyone, that some people, whether through nature or through a crayon lodged in their frontal lobe, might be born without the void, might be born complete, or at least complete enough to sit in a quiet room without reaching for their phone or their ambitions or their existential dread. This is a comforting thought, even if it's not entirely applicable to most of us. Because even if we can't be Homer all the time, we can aim for moments of Homer-like stillness. Moments where we let the void go unfilled. Moments where we stop trying to solve the riddle and just let the riddle be. Moments where we sit in the quiet room and find, to our surprise, that the quiet is not empty. The quiet is full of everything we've been too busy to notice. So what does Homer Simpson teach us about being alive? After everything we've explored tonight, after Aristotle and Mill and Camus and Epicurus and Nietzsche and all the rest, what's left? What can a cartoon man who once got his head stuck in a drawbridge actually tell us about the human condition? Let me try to gather the threads together. Not into a neat conclusion, because the whole point of tonight has been that there are no neat conclusions here, but into something softer than a conclusion, something more like a lullaby made of ideas. The first thing Homer teaches us is that happiness might not require understanding. This is perhaps his most radical lesson, and it's the one that challenges the Western philosophical tradition most directly. From Socrates to the present day, we've been told that the good life is the examined life, that you need to understand yourself and the world around you in order to live well. That knowledge is the foundation of happiness. Homer suggests otherwise. Homer's happiness doesn't come from understanding. It comes from experiencing. It comes from being fully present in his life, even though he can't explain his life or analyze it or make sense of it. He just lives, and the living is enough. This doesn't mean that understanding is worthless. Lisa's understanding brings her genuine goods that Homer will never access. The joy of solving a math problem, the beauty of a piece of music that you had to study to appreciate, the satisfaction of understanding a complex system or seeing a pattern that nobody else sees. These are real pleasures, real goods, and Homer's inability to access them is a genuine loss. But Homer's inability to access these higher pleasures doesn't negate the lower pleasures that he does access. His donut is still delicious. His couch is still comfortable. His wife is still warm beside him. His life is still, from the inside, a life worth living. The lesson isn't that you should stop thinking or stop learning or stop trying to understand the world. The lesson is that understanding isn't a prerequisite for happiness. You can be happy without understanding why you're happy. You can love without understanding love. You can find life meaningful without understanding what meaning is. These are things that the philosophical tradition has sometimes forgotten, in its rush to privilege the intellect over everything else. Homer remembers them without knowing he's remembering anything at all. The second thing Homer teaches us is that love doesn't need eloquence. Homer is terrible with words. He can barely express a coherent thought, let alone articulate the complex emotions he feels for the people in his life. He can't write poetry for Marge. He can't discuss philosophy with Lisa. He can't explain to Bart why he should behave better. He's not articulate, not expressive, not capable of the kind of verbal intimacy that many people consider essential to a loving relationship. And yet Homer loves. He loves in actions, not words. He covers a demotivational plaque with photos of his baby. He writes a letter to Lisa while he's still smart enough to write it, knowing he'll never remember having written it. He pushes his family out of the way of a car while carrying a boulder to a bridge. He goes back to a job he hates because his family needs the money. He shows up day after day, imperfect and inadequate and present. This is love in its most basic form. Not the love of sonnets and grand gestures. Not the love of profound emotional conversations and deep mutual understanding. Just the love of being there, of coming home, of trying even when you fail, of caring even when you can't show it properly, Homer's love is the love of a man who gives what he has, which isn't much, but gives it completely. And the show suggests gently and consistently across decades that this kind of love, this clumsy, inarticulate, stubbornly present love, might be worth more than all the eloquence in the world. If you've ever felt that you weren't good enough at expressing your feelings, if you've ever worried that your love wasn't sophisticated enough or verbal enough or demonstrative enough, Homer is a quiet reassurance. Love doesn't require a vocabulary. It requires a presence. And presence is something that anyone can offer, regardless of how many words they know. The third thing Homer teaches us is that resilience doesn't require growth. This is maybe the most countercultural of Homer's lessons, because our culture is obsessed with growth. Personal growth, professional growth, emotional growth, spiritual growth. We're told constantly that we should be learning, improving, evolving, becoming better versions of ourselves. The self-help industry is worth billions of dollars. The therapy industry is built on the idea that people can and should change. The entire narrative structure of most stories, most movies, most novels, most television shows depends on the protagonist growing and changing over the course of the story. The hero starts as one thing and ends as something better. Homer doesn't grow. Homer doesn't change. Homer is the same person in season 35 that he was in season 1. He hasn't learned from his mistakes. He hasn't overcome his flaws. He hasn't become wiser or kinder or more responsible. He's still the same selfish, lazy, impulsive, loving, joyful, resilient fool he's always been. And yet he survives. He endures. He keeps going episode after episode, decade after decade. He's been knocked down more times than any character in fiction, and he gets up every single time. Not because he's learned something from the experience. Not because he's grown as a person. Just because getting up is what he does. Getting up is who he is. There's a lesson here that the growth-obsessed culture doesn't want to hear. Sometimes just keeping going is enough. Sometimes you don't need to learn a lesson from your pain or extract meaning from your failure or emerge from your crisis as a better version of yourself. Sometimes the achievement is simply surviving, simply getting up, simply showing up tomorrow, no wiser and no better, but present. Still here, still trying, still Homer. This isn't an argument against growth. Growth is good. Learning is good. Becoming a better person is good. But sometimes growth isn't available. Sometimes you've done everything you can and you're still the same person with the same problems and the same limitations. And in those moments, Homer's model of resilience, the model that says you don't have to grow to survive, you just have to keep showing up, is a profound comfort. It says that your value doesn't depend on your ability to improve, that you're allowed to be the same person you were yesterday. That getting up is, by itself, an act of courage, even if you get up into the same life you've always had. The fourth thing Homer teaches us, and maybe the most important, is that the gently noticed life might be as valuable as the examined life. Socrates said the unexamined life is not worth living. It's one of the most famous sentences in the history of philosophy, and it contains an important truth. Self-reflection matters. Understanding yourself matters. Thinking about your choices and your values and the direction of your life matters. But Homer suggests a different kind of attention, not the sharp, analytical attention of the philosopher examining his own thoughts. Something softer, something warmer, something more like the attention of a man who notices that the sun is coming through the kitchen window and landing on his donut in a way that makes it glow. Something like the attention of a father who hears his daughter playing the saxophone upstairs and doesn't understand the music but knows it's beautiful. Something like the attention of a husband who rolls over in bed and sees his wife sleeping beside him and feels, without words, without analysis, without any philosophical framework, that his life is good. This is the gently noticed life. Not examined, not analyzed, not scrutinized or evaluated or optimized. Just noticed, just appreciated. Just experienced with a simple, uncomplicated gratitude that doesn't need to understand itself to be real. Homer lives a gently noticed life. He notices donuts. He notices sunsets sometimes. He notices when Marge smells good. He notices when Bart does something funny. He notices when Lisa plays something beautiful. He notices these things the way a dog notices a warm spot on the floor without commentary or interpretation. Just a simple, "This is good," that comes from somewhere deeper than thought. And maybe the show whispers to us across 3.5 decades, maybe that's a life worth living too. Maybe you don't have to examine your life for it to matter. Maybe you just have to notice it. Maybe the act of paying attention, even the unfocused, simple, donut-centric attention that Homer pays, is enough to make a life meaningful. Not meaningful in the way a philosopher would recognize. Not meaningful in the way that gets written about in books. But meaningful in the way that matters when you're lying in bed at the end of the day and the house is quiet and the people you love are sleeping nearby and you think, without words, without philosophy, without any framework at all, that this is good. This is enough. This is a life. Homer would never say any of this. Homer doesn't know he's living a philosophical life. He doesn't know that his existence raises questions that the greatest minds in history have struggled with. He doesn't know that his happiness challenges Aristotle, his resilience illustrates Camus, his simplicity embodies Epicurus, his love defies Mill. He doesn't know any of it. And that's okay. That's more than okay. That's the whole point. Because the people who know these things, the philosophers and the thinkers and the wise ones who have spent their lives trying to answer the questions that Homer's existence raises, most of them aren't as happy as Homer. Most of them are more like Lisa. Brilliant and burdened, aware and aching, seeing everything clearly and wishing sometimes that they could see a little less. Homer sees almost nothing, and what little he sees, he loves. So as you lie there tonight, wherever you are, whatever your life looks like, whatever questions are keeping you awake or gently nudging you towards sleep, consider this. You don't have to figure it all out. You don't have to solve the riddle of existence or find the meaning of life or determine whether knowledge is better than happiness. You don't have to be wise. You don't have to be enlightened. You don't have to grow or change or become a better version of yourself tonight. Tonight, you can just be here. You can notice the weight of the blankets on your body. You can notice the sound of your own breathing, the gentle rhythm of it, in and out, without effort, without thought. You can notice the darkness behind your eyelids and the warmth of wherever you're lying and the simple, profound fact that you exist, that you're alive, that you're here in this moment and this moment is yours. Homer would say, sleep, and he'd close his eyes, and he wouldn't think about Aristotle or Mill or Camus. He wouldn't worry about whether his happiness is real or whether his life is meaningful or whether he's living up to his potential. He'd just lie there, warm and comfortable and present, and he'd drift off into a sleep as deep and uncomplicated as a man who has never once worried about the meaning of anything. You can do that too, not forever. Tomorrow you'll get up and you'll think and plan and worry and strive, because that's what humans do, and because the world needs people who think and plan and worry and strive. Lisa needs to exist. The world needs Lisas. The world needs people who see clearly and fight for justice and push for something better. But tonight, right now, in this quiet moment between today and tomorrow, you can be Homer. You can let the thinking stop. You can let the worrying rest. You can let the big questions sit on the nightstand like a glass of water there if you need them, but not demanding anything of you right now. The boulder will be there in the morning. You can push it up the hill tomorrow. Camus says you must imagine Sisyphus happy. But tonight, imagine Sisyphus asleep. Imagine the boulder resting at the bottom of the hill, going nowhere, needing nothing. Imagine the hill itself settling into the earth, patient and unmoved. Imagine the whole absurd, beautiful, confusing universe quieting down just for a moment, just for tonight, and letting you rest. Homer is sleeping. Marge is sleeping beside him, her blue hair fanning across the pillow. Bart is sleeping in his room, dreaming of skateboards and mischief. Lisa is sleeping in hers, her saxophone resting in the corner, the questions that keep her up at night finally releasing their grip. Maggie is sleeping in her crib, the rhythmic sound of her pacifier slowing, stopping. The house on Evergreen Terrace is dark and warm and quiet. The streets of Springfield are empty. The nuclear power plant hums softly in the distance, somehow not melting down tonight. The whole little cartoon world is at peace. And somewhere in that peace, in that warm, yellow-skinned, four-fingered, impossibly enduring world, a man who never read a book of philosophy and never will is lying in his bed, happy. Just happy, simply, stubbornly, inexplicably happy. Not because he's earned it, not because he deserves it, not because the universe owes it to him, just because happiness is what he does. It's who he is, it's all he's ever known, and all he's ever needed. If you enjoyed spending this time thinking about Homer and philosophy, and if it helped you relax and drift towards sleep, a subscribe would mean the world to us. It helps us make more of these, and it's completely free. But if you're already asleep, that's the best compliment we could ask for. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for thinking these thoughts with us. Thank you for spending your evening with Homer and Aristotle and Lisa and Camus and Marge and Mill and all the rest. Now close your eyes if they're not closed already. Breathe in, breathe out, and let yourself fall asleep to the philosophy of Homer Simpson. Sleep.